Department of Mathematics at Indiana University. He and his family have lived in Bloomington since 2003, and he volunteered to moderate for us tonight, so he'll be asking all the questions. So Dr. Donald.
Well, thank you, and I want to say welcome. First, I'd like to acknowledge all the tireless efforts of all the groups that came together to actually produce this and put this program on, this panel discussion on a very controversial but important topic, namely abortion. And I especially want to thank Jenna Fisher and Monica Rachel, who can't be with us today, unfortunately, due to an illness, for countless hours that they put together, putting these speakers together, some nationally known speakers together, so that you can hear their viewpoints and different viewpoints on abortion. And so also the audience members, I know some of you may be here because you have to be here for a class, or others of you are passionate about this, but I want to thank you for coming out. So let's thank everyone who put all this effort into this program. We can all agree that abortion is an emotionally charged topic. Tonight, I'm excited that we'll be able to bring together differing viewpoints and intelligent people who can speak to different sides of this important and controversial issue. So I also want you to engage in the discussion as well. At the very end, we'll have an open mic here, so you can bring forward your questions that you might have about abortion. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes. It's a little higher. I'm not used to these things. So this is an important thing that I want you to contribute to, but I want you to please be respectful of the speakers. If anyone is particularly disruptive, we'll have to ask you to leave. Of course, we wouldn't like to do that. We'd like you to be able to stay here, listen, learn, and state your concerns and questions at the end as well. So one of the things that we'll be doing is having a round discussion. So in other words, every speaker will have an opportunity to answer each question, and we'll have a timer for that. The general question, except for the first, will be 1 minute and 30 seconds long, the answer period. At a minute, there'll be a beep that will tell you that there's 30 seconds left to answer. Then there will be 2 beeps, which is telling you time up. And 10 seconds later, there'll be 3 beeps, which is telling you absolutely move on. Otherwise, there'll be dire consequences. So I want you each to respect that, please, so we can each hear everyone's point of view and in turn. And we thank you again, especially for being here. And so I'd like to introduce the panelists. So first, Pam Whitehead traveled here from Texas to be with us tonight, and we're very thankful for that. And she has funded a ministry to help women in crisis situations have the support and help they need to choose life. Her deepest desire is that all human life would be seen as valuable and abortion would become unthinkable because we have wrapped women in love and resources. Pam is a U.S. Army veteran and has worked in a medic lab as a medic lab tech for 20 years. She has 3 children, and one that was placed for adoption, and amazing support husband. Next, we'd like to welcome Dr. Albrecht Holschuh. And Dr. Holschuh comes from Germany and made his home here in Bloomington for many years, where he's been an active member of the Indiana University faculty and Bloomington communities. He has served as chair of the Institute Director for the Department of Germanic Languages and has received many distinguished awards recognizing his excellence in teaching. You can see some of those up there. He's been very active in serving the community, working with Community Kitchen, teaching English to adult immigrants. He's also been involved with Big Brothers, Big Sisters, Bloomington Worldwide Friendship, and an escort at Planned Parenthood as well. Next, we'd like to welcome Ryan Baumberger. And Ryan is the founder of the Radiance Foundation, which works with organizations around the world to share truth about human dignity. He is a broadcast member, media designer, producer, columnist, speaker, author of the book, Not Equal, Civil Rights Gone Wrong. Today, as an adoptee and a father of 4 awesome children of his own, 2 of whom are adopted, he enjoys illuminating the intrinsic worth we all possess. Next, I'd like to welcome Regan Davis. Sorry, is that Reagan or Regan?
Reagan.
Reagan. Okay, I think I got the accent. Reagan Davis is the current president of the College Democrats at Indiana University and serves as a teaching assistant in the political science department. She is a political activist, being a campaign coordinator for Patrick Stofers for County Commissioner campaign, and also working on 8 different political campaigns in the past 3 years. That's pretty impressive. She's also been an active member of environmental advocacy work, lobbied for the international aid organizations, and spearheaded the creation of an LGBT affinity group for women and Greek organizations, and also led the most recent rally for reproductive justice on IU's campus. Lastly, we have Seth Dreyer, and he is the Director of Training for Create the Equal, a pro-life education outreach organization. Seth equips the next generation with a scientific philosophic case for life and conversational skills to create dialogue about abortion. Seth is the Director of Campus Training and Outreach for the Center of Bioethical Reform in the Midwest, and is the Youth Minister at Trinity Evangelical Church. He's also married to his beautiful wife and has 2 children. Seth holds a Bachelor's in Arts in French Teaching from Indiana University, so we're welcoming him back to his old stomping grounds. So thank you. Let's welcome all these panelists and thank them for being here. Okay, and as I mentioned, one thing, additional thing, so there'll be 1:30, and so the bells will go off at the corresponding times, but there will also be a short amount of time to respond to a question, and that'll be on an individual basis. Someone can request a rebuttal if they would like at the end of all of the statements. So there'll be a shorter time. If there's enough people asking a rebuttal, we can divide that up. Okay, well, let's begin. And the first question: why do you personally support and oppose abortion? And let's begin with Pamela, and you'll always move down from the person on your right, going down the row, but I might start at a different person each time, so let's start with Pamela.
Personally, I oppose abortion. I'm not a woman who sits here ignorant of what abortion actually does to a woman. I am a post-abortive woman. I had an abortion in 2001, and my uterus was perforated. I hemorrhaged and ended up in the emergency room in the hospital overnight. Thankfully, I'm here today, but there are many women who are not because of that.
We can't hear.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay. Let's move, yeah. We'll have to grab the mics each person, so
Okay.
go ahead.
Can you hear me now? Is that better?
Reset.
I can talk really loud.
I'll reset you there. You go ahead.
Okay. So I personally oppose abortion. I am a post-abortive woman. I had an abortion in 2001 that harmed me. It perforated my uterus. I ended up in the emergency room and in the hospital. I'm here today, thankfully, but many women have suffered from abortion and are not alive today because of that, or cannot have children. Abortion also harms a human person, the tiniest of us. I believe that all life is valuable, from fertilization until death. And so I believe that fetuses in the womb have intrinsic value, and they're just as valuable as you and I. So I oppose abortion for those reasons.
Next.
I want to speak here, and I support the right to abortion for 3 main reasons. One is my lifetime experience, which I will get to in a moment, or maybe I should start it now. When I grew up in Europe, in Germany, of course, abortion was not legal, and contraceptives were not very good either. The main effect of that was that people simply got married in a hurry. Society saw to it that they were all taken care of and quickly married whenever possible. So single mothers were truly rare. The effect of that, however, turned out, and it was easy to observe, a lot of unhappy families. Especially if the male and female had not at all intended to get married. It led to unhappy families and hence unhappy children, and some loss in social status and in income because they could not earn that way. There are other reasons like this, but let me just skip. I came to the United States, where the situation was very much the same. And I learned to deal with students in crisis who were looking for ways out because they clearly did not want to marry. I was aware of the market in illegal abortions, unsupervised, of course, and all the things depending on that. Students who chose to carry their baby to term obviously were at the end of their college career. There was no way to support them unless the family was very generous at home. At least they were set back, and of course they did not come back very soon. So overall, the experience was certainly not positive. Quite apart from the fact,
We'll need you to move on to the next speaker, so we have a 2-minute time limit on that. So we'll continue on. We'll be able to continue that discussion directly later on in future questions. So thanks. So next, go on. Begin.
Okay. I oppose abortion because it kills an innocent, defenseless human being. It is the only form of violence against the weak that is celebrated and dressed up in elusive euphemisms. I am particularly against the violence of abortion because I'm the 1% that is used 100% of the time to justify abortion. My biological mother faced the horror and the violence of rape, yet she chose to be stronger than her circumstances, not only giving me life, but also giving me the incredible gift of adoption. So I grew up in a small family of 15. I have 6 brothers, 6 sisters. 9 of my other siblings are adopted, so out of 13 kids, 10 of us are adopted. And we were all adopted from broken backgrounds. The world would have said we would have been, because we were unplanned, that we would have been unwanted and unloved, and it's not true. There's no such thing as unwanted. Some of us may have been unwanted by a biological parent or parents, but we're all wanted by someone. And I learned that growing up in this multiracial, diverse family of 15. And now, I am very happily married to the love of my life, Bethany Bomberger, she's the co-founder of the Radiance Foundation. She was a single mom for about 2 years. Finds herself pregnant in a pretty bad situation, a boyfriend who was abusive, verbally and psychologically abusive. And the pressure on her as a teacher from her colleagues to abort was unbelievable. She never considered abortion. But sometimes people who are well-meaning can come across pretty callous, particularly when they say things like, well, just abort it. Some even offered to pay for her abortion. Well, thankfully, she realized that the only outcome to unplanned is not misery, but that the unplanned can beautifully and radically change you. And she became more than she ever knew that she could be. Her daughter, Haley Radiance, is actually the inspiration for the name of our organization, the Radiance Foundation. And so now I'm a father of 4, 2 of my kiddos are adopted. So these are just a few of the many, many reasons that I oppose the violence of abortion.
Hi y'all, I want to thank you again for inviting me to participate on this panel, particularly because I think I bring a really interesting perspective in that of the people here, I demographically am the most likely to need an abortion sometime soon. 85% of women who get abortions are unmarried like myself, 66% are in their mid-20s or are some point in their 20s. So for me, this is a personal issue because I see it happening to my sisters. I see it happening to people around me just like me. And I support it the same way I support appendectomies or chemotherapy. Like other medical practices, I see abortion as something that is necessary. And it is a difficult decision, but at the end of the day, it's a decision that has to be made by individuals. I don't even know the names of the women who we're talking about here, let alone what's best for them. And especially if you read up on female psychology, it's really interesting the way that women see their lives, they're trained to see their lives as being put in a kind of web. Every move they make affects other people. So even though I might see someone walking past me and make judgments, every decision that they have made, including if that is the decision to have an abortion, has been made with great care. They have considered the effects to their life, the effects to their families' lives, the effects to the potential life inside of them depending on how you see it. They have decided to protect themselves from what they see as the destruction of their futures. Even if they choose adoption, that's still 9 months of medical bills. That's still 9 months of pregnancy. That's still 9 months of interfering with your life. And from a policy perspective, when we talk about the legislation around this, what we see is that when you have more restrictive abortion laws, you don't have fewer abortions. You have more back alley abortions. So in the end, I support it from both a policy perspective and a personal perspective.
I oppose abortion because I believe in something very radical, that all humans are equal. We have this tragic history in our past of taking rights from the other, humans who are different from us, whether it be men oppressing women or people with white skin oppressing those with black skin. In abortion, we have born humans stripping rights from humans who are different from them, that is too young to be born. The case against abortion can be summarized. It is wrong to intentionally kill innocent humans. Elective abortion does that, intentionally kills innocent humans, thus elective abortion is wrong. And I think all of us tonight probably agree it's wrong to intentionally kill innocent humans. That's why Parkland, Florida was not just a tragedy, but a moral crime. Innocent humans were targeted for death. But is the embryo targeted by abortion human? Well, there's no debate, truly scientifically. Advances in human embryology make it clear that the embryo at fertilization is a distinct, living, whole human. The debate is whether that human is equal to all of us. People say she's different, she's the other, she can't be a person like we are. But there are only 4 differences between embryos and born humans like us. They're smaller, they're less developed, in a different environment, and more dependent on their parents than we are. But do these differences really matter when it comes to value or personhood? I don't think so. I think I can prove why, because my daughter's here tonight, my 4-month-old daughter, Cora. How is she different from you? She's smaller, less developed. This morning she was in Ohio, now she's in Indiana. She was in a different environment than you were. And she's much more dependent on her parents than you are. But is she less of a person? No, she's not. These differences are irrelevant when it comes to our human value. And therefore we know the embryo targeted by abortion is not only human, but no less of a person, because her differences compared to you are the same differences between you and my daughter, which don't render her less of a person. Thus, the human being targeted by abortion, being ripped to pieces by abortion, is a distinct, living, whole human. That is wrong. We should not intentionally kill innocent humans. That's why I oppose abortion. There's a better way to say that all of us, every human being, is equal.
Thank you. And the next question is, in what way do you see abortion as a human's rights issue or as a woman's rights issue or a human rights issue?
Sorry, do we get a moment for the rebuttal?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Thank you. So let's see. Does anyone want to make a rebuttal of any of the statements made? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make a point. I think, Reagan, thank you for what you had to say. We get to be really careful here on our science, so when we compare abortion to appendectomy, there's a difference. An appendectomy is your appendix being removed. The fetus is not your body, it's another person's body inside of you. Reagan also referred to the fetus as a potential life, but something is not really a potential X is an actual Y. So a stick of gum is a potential wad in the trash, right? But it still is an actual stick of gum. That fetus may be a potential mother, father, doctor, lawyer, but she is right now an actual human being. So we're not talking about potential. The fetus is an actual human being. So let's at least be honest about what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a procedure that dismembers and decapitates that living human being who is an actual human.
If you don't mind, I would like to point out that when you make that comparison, and especially when you brought up your daughter as a sort of prop here, I think the distinction that I see, at least, is can a living being, I suppose, a better way to phrase it, is someone considered to be a whole human, equal, considered to be the exact same, if they cannot exist without the life force of someone else? If I'm tied to another human being and I need their food and I need their care and I need them to pay medical bill upon medical bill, and not in a parental sense but in terms of I am actually physically attached to their body, that does make a distinction. And even though when we're talking about removing an appendix, you're right, it's your appendix, but when we're talking about removing a fetus, in that case, again, you have something that is a part of you, but it is still a part of you. It is still in your body, it is still in your decision, and
Okay, we're going to limit rebuttals. You can finish up just your last statement there. We're going to limit rebuttals to about 2 minutes.
I believe it's more complicated than you're making it seem.
Okay.
How
Thank
many
you.
were able to respond?
Well, we're gonna, depends on how much time we have. We wanted to keep that to about 2 minutes, so let's move on for now, and then you'll have a chance to,
Okay.
I will make sure we can distribute who says the rebuttal, so we'll get that chance. So in what way do you see an abortion as a women's rights issue or a human rights issue? And I'd like to start with Dr. Holsham.
To me, this is primarily a women's rights issue because of the domination of one gender by the other. There is no doubt that women are the ones who have to carry it, whether they want it or not. But beyond that, it is a social and economic issue that is being ignored. There is huge cost in the aggregate to society.
You're next, go ahead.
I think it's interesting when we look at founding feminists like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who had a periodical called The Revolution. They laid out really unambiguously what they considered abortion to be. In their 1868, March 1868 version of The Revolution, they had an article entitled Child Murder. That's how they described abortion. These are founding feminists. So I find it interesting that women's rights, especially when it tries to enshrine abortion as some supposed right, ignores founding feminists. I think what we should talk about is actually women's right to know. And what we see is the abortion industry, particularly through Planned Parenthood, fighting every single common sense bill to inform women fully about pregnancy and all the ramifications of abortion. And we don't see that. A woman's right to know. I think a woman should have a right to know that every major medical service to women at Planned Parenthood has been plummeting for 10 years. Breast cancer screenings are down 62%. Pap tests are down 72%. Prenatal care, which barely exists at Planned Parenthood, has fallen 81% since 2009. Women should have the right to know. Of course, it's a human rights issue. None of us would be in here without a male and a female in the procreation process. So that's why I believe firmly it's a human rights issue. But I have this card in the back. It's called The Social Injustice of Abortion. And it's interesting because the UN, which is not considered some sort of right-wing religious organization, had to say this about humanity in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In Article 3, it says, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. And in the Declaration of the Rights of the Child, it says, the child, by reason of his physical or mental immaturity, needs special safeguards and care, including appropriate legal protection before as well as after birth. So, yes, it is a human rights issue.
I think the question implies a false dichotomy, if we're being honest. I don't think women's rights and human rights are mutually exclusive. As the cliche goes, women's rights are human rights. I also think that it's important that we note, too, it isn't just women who get abortions. We have trans individuals in our society. We have individuals who identify outside of the gender spectrum, and those individuals are also getting abortions. So I guess I would say that it's a human rights issue just because we're not just dealing with women. I'd also like to really quickly state, because that's basically the extent of it, that I proudly ignore the founding feminists on a daily basis. Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton didn't want black women to march with white women. They largely fought against proud individuals who were working towards the rights of black individuals, the rights of people of color, and by and large supported prohibition, which I don't think anyone on this campus supports. So I proudly ignore the founding feminists on a daily basis. Their views were from the late 1800s, early 1900s. They didn't account for the things that we have to deal with as women today. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that.
I think this is fundamentally a human rights issue, but with implications for women's rights. So who has human rights? Humans, right? That's why we call them human rights. So all humans have human rights. So again, what is the embryo in the womb? Human or not? We have human rights because we're humans. Are they humans? Don't just take my word for it. The leading embryologists today in their textbooks make it clear that at fertilization a human being exists. Doctors Moore, Prasad, and Torsha in the Developing Human Clinically Oriented Embryology write this: that human development begins at fertilization when the sperm fuses with the oocyte to form a single cell, the zygote. This highly specialized totipotent cell marks the beginning of each of us as a unique individual. So we know that this is in fact a human. Now Reagan referred to it saying this is part of you. There's no doubt this human is intimately tied to the mother, but still a distinct being who depends on her mother, again, to a greater degree than a born child does, but still, a born child still depends on her mother as well. Depending on someone does not strip you of your human rights. If it did, what would that mean for diabetic people who depend on insulin? They wouldn't have human rights because they depend on someone. Dependency doesn't make you not a human person. Now, how does this have implications for women's rights, though? According to the UN, in India alone, there are 50 million girls missing because they're not the preferred sex. They're aborted. Many girls are missing because they've been killed in the womb, more girls than boys. And that's why in India, men are having a hard time finding wives. So they buy sex. Who do they buy sex from? Sex slaves. Girls who are forced into sex slavery, some servicing 20 men or more in dirty brothels far from home. This has overwhelming implications for women's rights. Still, at its fundamental basis, this is a human rights issue because humans are being stripped of their rights. Humans are being dismembered, decapitated, and disemboweled.
I can absolutely agree with Reagan that women's rights and human rights are not separate. That is absolutely true. Women are human, right? And the unborn are human. Everything reproduces its own kind. So if a man and a woman get together, they're intimate, they have sex, she gets pregnant, she's pregnant with a human. Human is a species, right? It's not a level of development. It is what it is. Okay, so yes, it's a human rights issue. Now, we can talk about personhood. We're going to talk about that eventually. And it's absolutely a woman's rights issue because the procedure is performed on women. I can disagree with Reagan in that way. The procedure is performed on women. Women deserve so much more than abortion. Abortion is actually the ultimate exploitation of women, and it pits a mother against her child. It makes the child her enemy. Abortion says, I can't. It always says I can't. It never says that I can. And it says that the child is the source of her problems, and the child is not the source of her problems. When a woman has abortion, those problems are still there. We must wrap women in love and resources, empowering them. Women are strong and they can accomplish so much more than society thinks that we can. Abortion harms women. It never heals. Abortion is not health care. It doesn't heal anything. Pregnancy is not a disease. It's not a diagnosis. It's not a syndrome. Telling a woman that she will not accomplish her dreams unless she aborts her child is demeaning and it's disrespectful. Telling me that I can't makes me angry. Some women feel pressure to abort because their employers don't pay them equal pay for equal work. Some women feel pressure to abort because they don't have paid maternity leave. This must change in our country. So we must treat women better in all respects. Abortion is evidence that society has failed to meet the real needs of women.
Thank you. Any rebuttals, especially you three first?
I would like to.
Go for it.
I just have a question. Reagan, you're part of the college Democrats, correct?
Yes, I am. I'm the president.
Right. So, do you reject Democrats because they were pro-slavery? Because they voted against the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments almost unanimously?
What you're ignoring in stating that is that I am, first of all, I consider myself to be a progressive more than I consider myself to be a Democrat.
But you're part of the Democrat college group, correct?
Yes, and I am, because
But you
the
embrace
Democratic
the
Party
Democrat
right now,
ideology.
the Democratic Party right now identifies with progressive ideologies.
Right,
At
which
the
would
time, the
include-
progressive ideologies were those that were fighting against slavery. At the time, the Democrats weren't the progressives. Right now, I'm a Democrat because Democrats are the progressives.
Right, and so you think it's progressive, for instance, to celebrate in New York City where more black babies are aborted than born alive, where Democrats celebrate that as a form of justice, correct?
I'd actually like to break in here, so we want to have the rebuttals be one person at a time, if we can, so
So we have a certain amount of time.
Yeah, so I'm giving 2 minutes for the full vote.
I'll just ask one last question. I'm assuming since you identify as pro-choice that you support Margaret Sanger, correct?
Industry, it is a national organization devoted to helping people. It does not make any money. That's stupid and very disingenuous. It is run by lots of volunteers, of which I am one, and donations. No money that they get from federal sources or so ever goes to abortion. There are other, this is just such a long list of, let's say it, untruths. Please find out first and independently, and maybe see what is there, before simply downgrading what you don't want to see. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead. I think this is actually an interesting discussion. We're going to be touching back on this later, so I just want to, but you can have a time to speak.
Thank you. Actually, 51% of Planned Parenthood's income comes from abortion. If you count the number of abortions that Planned Parenthood did last year, it's over 320,000. The most abortions occur in the first trimester. A first trimester abortion costs $550. Do the math. Planned Parenthood also receives $500 million from the federal government every year in reimbursements and grants for supposed health care. However, every one of their health care services has plummeted. In the past 6-8 years, they've plummeted drastically by 62%. Is that correct? 62%? So, yes, please research for yourself. You can go to radiance.life. The information is available. It's also in the back.
Do you mind if I ask a quick question? Have they plummeted because they're performing less or because more of them have been shut down?
I can answer that.
Sure.
Because they understand what brings in money. They've lost 670,000 patients per year since Cecile Richards took over in 2006. The reason why these services are plummeting is because they understand what makes the money, and it's abortion. It's not an STD test. It's not breast cancer screening. It's not Pap tests. So all of them have been plummeting drastically in the last 10 years. And this is a question that I think women should ask themselves. Why does the organization that touts itself as the leading women's healthcare organization that doesn't own one single mammogram machine, why is every service plummeting at the nation's largest abortion chain? Yes, by the way, they make $73 million in profit. They make a lot of money. That's their own annual reports, and you can look those up and look at all the numbers yourself.
It's a gross misstatement, because there are nobody owns, nobody gets money. There is no such thing as profit. It doesn't exist. Then there are no stocks. There is nothing. Nobody gets paid for this. This is simply untrue.
All right, we're going to move to the next question, and we're going to be touching back with many of these themes that have been brought up, so I want to move ahead here. So we have time for audience questions, especially at the end. That's one of the main goals. So, at what point does human life begin, and when does the being have basic human rights? And we'll begin with you, Ryan.
It's interesting because when we talk about abortion, too often there are such pseudoscientific remarks made. We know, embryologists, for instance, have known for over 100 years that human life begins at fertilization. There is no question in science when human life begins. What people and what pro-choice activists love to do is to play a game of semantics and talk about personhood, as if there are any human beings who are born who aren't persons. Of course, it's a distinction without a difference. Every human being is a person, and every human being starts at the moment of fertilization. There is no doubt about that in science and in embryology. In fact, there's a really interesting, I just want to read this quote from Dr. Micheline Matthews-Roth, and she has this to say about when human life begins. She's the associate professor of medicine at Harvard. You might have heard of the college. Anybody in here? But she says this: I oppose the use of embryonic stem cells because to obtain those cells it is necessary to kill a growing human being. We know from embryology that a new life begins with the formation of the zygote, the cell formed from the union of egg and sperm and fertilization. This is scientific fact, not religious doctrine. What makes us human is not our looks, our mental attributes, but the human chromosomes and genes which we have in our cells from the zygote stage throughout our life. We should not condone killing a member of our species even for a good reason. And so we know when human life begins. I had a debate on NPR with the host, and we got to the point where he said, well, why do you oppose abortion? And I said, well, because it kills a human life. And his jaw drops. And he's, science doesn't know whether that's human or not. I said, wait a minute, what? Science doesn't know whether the unborn child is human or not? Of course science knows that. No, it's inconclusive, it's inconclusive. I said, I'm used to the game of semantics where people talk about person, and I said, frankly, it's kind of interesting because we're both brown, and the fact that you're arguing about the personhood of another group of human beings when we in this country have had to endure, people deciding to be the arbiters of human value. But anyway, he kept continuing to argue that science has not concluded that the unborn child is human.
It does not matter. My personal opinion of when a life begins does not matter. Because I'm not a member of this procedure at all. I'm not getting an abortion. I'm not performing an abortion. I am not at all interacting with this particular procedure. Like I said at the beginning, I don't even know these women's names, let alone what's best for their situation. If a woman believes that life begins at conception, then she probably won't get an abortion, or she only will under certain circumstances. If she believes that it begins at viability, then she'll only get an abortion before viability. And the distinction between what constitutes life in this case, my personal opinion on that matter doesn't matter. What matters is the woman's opinion. And what matters is, at the end of the day, her, because it's her decision, it's her choice, it's her body. I'd also like to point out that the beginning of life, when we talk about it again, has some really interesting policy implications. When you talk about when a life begins, usually that's when people try to restrict abortion to. But constitutionally, I know we're going to talk about the Constitution later, in terms of, as I mentioned earlier, the more restrictive your laws are, usually the more back alley abortions you're having, which are less safe. If you define that fetus as being a person, then in the end, you're going to end up with more quote-unquote deaths if you have back alley abortions. So I think the policy implications of this, trying to define life from a policy perspective, because the policy perspective and the biological perspective are different, trying to define life in a policy perspective is a really sticky subject in this regard, and I think it's not up to us.
It doesn't matter. Why are we upset again when we hear about Parkland, Florida? Not because bushes were fired on, but people, humans were killed. This whole debate is all about this. And yet, this is not the controversial part. As Ryan said, this has been settled for a long time. There's no serious scientific debate on this point. Maureen Kondik, professor of neurobiology at University of Utah, she clearly defines in her paper, when does human life begin, a scientific perspective. When the sperm and egg come together, they create a new thing, that one-celled zygote that is living, growing. Dead things don't grow. This is a living thing. Dr. Kondik says that being is a whole being. This is a self-integrating organism coordinating its own development. Not just a random skin cell on the table. This is a being directing her development that belongs to a species, as Pam said, the human species. This is why Dr. C. Ward Kisher, embryologist from the University of Arizona, says every embryologist in the world knows human life begins at fertilization. Even many abortion advocates admit this point, like Peter Singer, Princeton bioethicist. He clearly says that there's no doubt that an embryo conceived from human sperm and eggs is a human. Or Judith Arcana, who does abortions. She says we should never disregard the fact that when a woman is pregnant, that means there's a baby inside of her, a baby whose life is ended. Judith Arcana, an abortionist herself. There's no debate on this point. The debate is what Ryan picked up, which is personhood. Some say humans different than us, they just don't matter like we do. But again, they only differ in 4 ways: size, level of development, environment, dependency. Does size determine your value? I hope not. I'm smaller than my friend Ryan, but I think we're equal persons, right? Level of development, if that mattered, then, I have my degree from IU already. Some of you are working on it. I'd be a person, you wouldn't be a person yet, but that's silly. Level of development's irrelevant to your value. An environment, when I go home to Ohio tonight, I'm still going to be the same person I am today, right now, this moment. Dependency, She has to be really independent. What does that mean for some college students who still depend on mom and dad sometimes? Would you be non-persons? We know that's silly. Humans, all humans, regardless of your differences, matter and have the same human rights.
Go ahead.
The very definition of life is the condition that distinguishes animals and plants from inorganic matter, including the capacity for growth, reproduction, functional activity, and continual change preceding death. We know that life begins at fertilization. Society admits that life begins at fertilization in all avenues except for abortion. We have in vitro fertilization, right? You can't tell my friends who are gay that the baby that they conceived by in vitro fertilization was not a baby when it was implanted inside of her. That was a baby. That was a human life. So we know as a society that life begins at fertilization. And again, this is not the issue here because just as Reagan said, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter to most people. It's personhood that we're talking about. Do these unborn persons have value? And is their value the same? Is it equal to the rest of us?
Excuse me, I thought you were finishing the last one. I'm sorry, I was disturbed. Were you moving on to the next one?
No, you.
I spoke before.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, we're gonna.
I spoke
Sorry, thank
before.
you. Yeah, we'll move on to. Well, first I want to ask if there's any rebuttals anyone wants to make.
Interview on a previous one?
Say again.
Interview on something previously discussed?
Or
has to be in this
let's keep it to
last
this.
round.
Now, at the end, I'll have a little bit of time for that. So
I'll make a point then. I think this is interesting that again we have pro-choice and pro-life perspectives up here, and no one here, as Pam has mentioned, no one's put forth any evidence that human life does not begin at fertilization. This is indisputed. This point has not been disputed, it's not been rejected or rebutted, and so at least we can assume this point stands. So as we continue onward and ask, do all humans matter? Let's at least be honest here. We know the embryo is a human being, no one has challenged that. So what we're asking now is, are all humans equal? What do you believe? As you listen to the pro-choice and pro-life sides, ask, which side makes sense with what seems true to me? Like, look around the room tonight. We look really different, right? Some of us are tall, some are short, some have long hair, short hair. We look very different skin colors, skin tones, and different histories and futures. Some have scars, we all look different. There's only one thing we have in common, our core humanness. That's it. That means we all are equal, but you're gonna hear other perspectives saying, no, that person depends on another person, therefore she's not really valuable. Maybe listen to that and realize that's prejudice, saying someone different than me, who is dependent, is not equal. Let's be clear that the side for equality is the side opposing abortion. The side for women is the side against abortion.
Speaking to that point, I suppose, since it was more or less directed at me, I would like to again clarify that when I'm talking about dependency, I'm not talking about, earlier you brought up diabetic people depending on insulin. I'm talking about someone depending on someone else in a way that their body is physically attached to them. You have to be with them every second. You have to pay for every medical bill related to that. You have to pay for all of that. You have to, every bit of food that you eat.
It's called parenthood. Just saying. That's called parenthood.
Yeah, except when you are a parent, your child is outside of you. There is still a distinction in this case. If I were pregnant right now, I'm 19. How would I be able to care for that? How would I be able to do that? So again, I think it's important that we distinguish between, biologically we can make arguments, politically we have to make sure that we're still keeping the distinction between the biological definition and the political definition.
thank you. We're going to move on to the next question. So actually, let's go back one. So next one. Thanks. Sorry.
I made a mistake. I thought I had spoken on the previous question.
Right, that's what,
I had not.
so you would like to just take your time. Okay, thanks. Go ahead.
Should I speak now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. At what point does human life begin, and when does this being have basic human rights? That is a matter of definition by society, because the tension between the rights of the pregnant woman and those of the fetus is inescapable. In the United States, humans are registered as persons after they are born. They do not show up in a census. Current law strikes a balance at the point of viability as assumed at the time of that ruling, with some exceptions for reasons of health of the woman and so forth. The issue will have to be revisited in the future as fetuses can be kept alive outside the body of the woman at earlier stages and can be developed into fully functioning babies. The conflict between the rights of the woman and the fetus may well have to be resolved on different grounds then, but they do exist. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, want a rebuttal? Okay.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Of the doctor? So do you oppose abortion after viability?
No, I was speaking of the law of the land solely, which has certain regulations after viability. For example, of course, threat to the life of the woman, the pregnant woman. As you probably know, the Catholic organizations run close to 40% of the hospitals in the United States. They refuse to help in such situations, but they are forced by law to allow the woman to be transported to a different facility where an emergency abortion can be provided. Just think of how difficult this is in many regions of this country and whether this is humane.
May I respond?
Briefly.
I'll do it very quickly. Abortion is never an emergency procedure. It's not possible for it to be an emergency procedure. A cesarean section is an emergency procedure.
All right, we're going to move on to the next question. So, are laws restricting abortion unconstitutional, and why or why not? And we'll start with Ray.
So legally speaking, late-term abortions can be banned according to the Constitution, but they're often banned without the necessary precautions. So some of the caveats that you are supposed to have when you're banning a late-term abortion. First of all, even after fetal viability, states can prohibit abortions that are necessary, or cannot prohibit abortions that are necessary to preserve the life and health of the mother. And health in this context has to include both physical and mental health. That's one thing that I think by and large goes overlooked in our society, mental health as a whole, but especially in regards to this issue. Second of all, only the physician, in the course of evaluating the specific circumstances of an individual case, can determine what constitutes health and when a fetus is viable. So it's not something that we can talk about here today and say, at this point, fetuses are viable. At this point, it's, according to the law, only the physician at that point. And states cannot require additional physicians to confirm that physician's judgment of the woman's health or whether the life is at risk. Now then, or whether her life is at risk. So you have basically, in these cases, one physician who is making the judgment. If the woman wants to go to an additional physician, she can, but the state cannot require her to. So that is the legal, the legal framework that we're talking about when we're working within the constitutional boundaries of this issue. Speaking from bringing some additional information in, slightly more than 1% of abortions are performed at 21 weeks or later. And what is slightly more than 1%? Why are these things happening? You have waiting periods. You have travel time. You have time for women to make the decision, time for them to become aware that they're pregnant. And by and large, these are happening because they are wanted pregnancies that women are finding out cannot exist without their death, without the death of both the woman and her potential child, without the death of the child in a painful, terrible way.
So are laws restricting abortion unconstitutional? Yes, they are. If the embryo is not a human. If she's not a human, then yes, it's unconstitutional to think of having laws restricting abortion. But again, tonight we've seen she is a human being. Thus, laws restricting abortion are in line with the Constitution. We have to remember, again, also be clear on our definition here, right? That abortion is permitted through all 9 months is not a constitutional law. That's Roe versus Wade and Doe v. Bolton law. So we need to be clear, the Constitution does not mention abortion. What we have were 9 men, no women on the court, 9 men took the reins and overturned all the anti-abortion laws across the U.S. and said you must permit abortion through all 9 months. And as Reagan said, they said through all 9 months, not just for her physical health can you not restrict abortion, but you have to allow abortion even for mental, emotional, financial health, they said, through all 9 months. So abortion is legal through all 9 months thanks to 9 men sitting on the court. This is not a vote of any kind. It's not from the Constitution. It was judicial fiat. That's why we have abortion today. Now, our Constitution has a preamble stating the goals, and one goal of our Constitution is to establish justice. You can't establish justice by enacting injustice. When you take a human being growing, grab her leg with a forceps, crush and rip it from her body, grab another leg, crush, rip, until you finally crush the head and pull it out, is that establishing justice? Or is that enacting injustice? Laws restricting abortion are in line with our goals of our Constitution. What we have are the greatest injustice the world's ever seen. 2,500 today die by abortion. 900,000 this year die by abortion. Now, Dr. Hochschild said that they're not on a census, but you know who else is not on a census? Undocumented people here in America. They're not on censuses, but they're still human beings, right? So again, we have to remember what matters is not a census or who recognizes you. What matters is, are you a human being? And if you are, you have human rights. And the embryo is a human being. So unless someone tonight has scientific evidence to show they're not humans, for us to restrict their rights, strip them from them, is no more than great prejudice.
Pamela?
So just like what Seth said, abortion is legal on demand throughout all 9 months of pregnancy. So women in this country have access to abortion in all 9 months of pregnancy. And let me make it clear that though states do have the rights to regulate abortion, however, a woman can still access an abortion in all 9 months of pregnancy. And I'll give you an example. I live in Houston. I advocate on the sidewalk in front of the largest Planned Parenthood in the country, and also in front of Houston Women's Clinic, which does 80 to 100 abortions every day. I stand in front of that clinic. There was a young girl, she was 15 years old. Her aunt was forcing her to have an abortion late term after 24 weeks. They paid for her $8,500 for her to fly to New Mexico to have that abortion. The abortion was paid for. It did not take a long time. She didn't have to wait. They sent her immediately. So what Reagan is saying is not true. Abortion is accessible, it is available, and there are people who make sure that it is. They pay for it so that minorities and undocumented people can have abortions without any loopholes. There's also a Jane's due process for young women to have abortions without their parents' consent. Our Constitution actually doesn't speak to the right of privacy upon which abortion is predicated. The law in this country there was a precedent set in another case. It was Griswold versus Connecticut, and that's what Roe was passed upon. That was cited in the decision that Roe is based on. So suppose that there is an explicit right to privacy, but just like Seth said, if the unborn are persons, then that right will make all other illegal activity come into question. So we could say we have a right to privacy and we could do whatever we want to another person, and that would still apply.
Public?
I cannot speak of all the possible issues about constitutionality of laws restricting abortion, but I want to pick one. The First Amendment, because religious beliefs are forced on the population as a whole, with clearly support from the organization supporting them. I'll give you an example which is not the United States now. The London Times, the New York Times, and The Economist, all three reported in the last few days that in Ireland, which, as you know, is a totally Catholic country, there will be a referendum in May to allow abortions. Not saying 9 months or anything like that. Basically just remove the insertion that the Catholic Church openly had inserted there in 1983. This time, the Catholic Church is not visible because it no longer has the support of the population because of the sex scandals, because of the mass graves of babies at the homes for fallen women, and so on. There were a few. By now, there is danger. There is a lot of support against the and as it turns out, it is all Catholic organizations from the United States, including advice on how to structure an election campaign, and so forth. If you think this is right in a good cause, I ask you, what's the difference to Putin?
Right.
Okay, I'm going to meander here for just a moment. That same report, New York Times, also cited the Irish Times, and it talked about undue influence from American organizations. And so there's this thing called the Referendum Transparency Initiative, and they're supposedly keeping track of paid ads from American organizations, pro-life organizations. We were one of the ones listed. It's funny because the post that they included in their database had nothing to do with the 8th Amendment. It's called Save the 8th. That's the whole campaign. It was a post about NIFLA, which is a network of pregnancy centers here, who's trying to be shut down by pro-abortion organizations, and they're trying to get pregnancy centers to promote abortion. But New York Times, Irish Times aren't exactly known for their accuracy. But getting back to the actual question, I just find it funny. It's fun to find your name in an article that is completely untrue. Anyway, the question is about the constitutionality of abortion. No, there is nothing in the Constitution that gives the right to kill an unborn child. Nothing at all. Roe and Doe. And I think I just want to take a moment to humanize these cases, because you have two women. Because we talk about abortion, you can't talk about abortion without talking about the exploitation of women. And two women who were incredibly exploited, Norma McCorvey, who was the Jane Roe of Roe v. Wade, and Sandra Cano of Doe v. Bolton. Neither one of these women wanted to have an abortion. Neither one of these women had an abortion. Norma McCorvey, in fact, placed her child for adoption. So I just find that interesting. But when it comes to the issue of abortion and whether or not laws restricting it are constitutional, the Supreme Court, in its ruling, written by Justice Harry Blackmun, said specifically, yes, the states can regulate this. And they did actually specify viability at 28 weeks. They said it can be even earlier at 24 weeks. But it says examples of permissible state regulation in this area are requirements as to the qualifications of the person who is to perform the abortion, as to the licensure of the person, as to the facility in which the procedure is to be performed, that is, whether it is to be a hospital or maybe a clinic or some other place of less than hospital status, as to the licensing of the facility and the like. They ignored their own ruling in Roe when they ruled against Texas's HB2, which was trying to hold abortion facilities to the same medical standards as ambulatory facilities.
All right, move on.
Really quickly, there are about 3 things in the Constitution debate that we've just had that kind of went overlooked, and I just want to bring them up really quickly. One, Planned Parenthood v. Casey. It was a decision in the 90s that allowed for more restrictions on abortion. So I know we've talked about Roe and Doe a lot. Planned Parenthood v. Casey hasn't come up, but that's actually the case that we're operating under. Planned Parenthood v. Casey overruled some parts of Roe v. Wade, and it allowed for more restrictions. So the idea that someone can get an abortion at all 9 months, no matter what, obviously this one example of Pam's to you might cancel out my overarching data that I've provided. Maybe it does, but from the statistics that I've provided you from the legal constitutional standpoint, that is not the case. Second of all, the U.S. law, by and large, looking overarchingly, historically, doesn't tend to respond well to taking the rights of one person for the rights of another when there is a distinction between 2 people. So even if you consider this to be 2 people, if you're looking at a U.S. law perspective, the U.S. law eventually will not get involved when it comes to rights of one versus rights of another. And finally, the Constitution might not expressly say anything about abortion, but that is why we have Supreme Court precedent, and that's why we have the Supreme Court to interpret the Constitution, because again, there talking about the abortion procedure during that.
Other rebuttals?
Yeah, I think that was maybe kind of something we were going back and forth on Reagan. Just a clarification. I think Reagan's right. When you have two human beings in play, the law does not force you to help that person. Like, if I knew that my friend...
Every year they give out the Margaret Sanger Award. Is she someone worthy of celebrating as the mother of the birth control crusade, as the mother of Planned Parenthood?
I very much support Planned Parenthood. I got my IUD there.
Okay, so if you do, I'm just wondering if you support this. Birth control itself, often denounced as a violation of natural law, is nothing more or less than the facilitation of the process of weeding out the unfit, of preventing the birth of defectives or of those who will become defective. So that is something that you embrace?
No, it is not. And again,
That's
this is
Margaret
the
Sanger's quote, chapter
Yeah,
18,
and that's
Women in
incredibly
News.
problematic. And again, that is why I'm rejecting the founding feminists, because people say problematic things. I don't have a favorite president. I don't wholeheartedly support any human being.
So you reject Margaret Sanger then, correct?
I reject that statement, yes.
All right, we're going to move on to the...
I actually had a rebuttal for
You have-
him, but I didn't have a chance to ask it because...
Yeah, let me give you, 30 seconds, you can do that if you can.
I just wanted to talk really briefly about your sex slavery comparison. So, if women are being aborted in India because they are considered less than men, wouldn't the problem be that they are considered less than men? Like, why are you fighting the procedure of abortion and not the patriarchy?
Okay, that's a great point. So I think the root problem, yes, is that women are demeaned, absolutely. But I was referring to the implications of killing young girls because of that. So I'm not saying that abortion is wrong because girls are killed. Abortion is wrong because any human is killed. Whether you're killing a boy or a girl, it is immoral, but I'm saying there are implications because of the sexism. More girls are killed than boys, and that I think is a tragedy you and I can agree to.
Okay, thank you.
Face reminded her of the rapist, and she said, I want to kill this baby. What would you say? Would it be right or wrong to kill that baby made in rape? I think we'd all agree it's wrong, because that's a human being. Looking at you, I can't tell whether you were made in violence or love. I really don't know. I know you are a human, so you have human rights. So even though the rape was a great crime, that crime does not justify killing someone else. Now, I have very limited time, so quickly, when the mother's life is in danger, just understand that elective abortion is the intent to kill. If the mother's life is in danger, she needs an operation to rescue her very existence. She's justified in saving her own life, but that's not an elective abortion. An elective abortion, the pregnancy is not the problem. It's the baby. It's the 18 years after birth that you have to be raising that child. That's the problem. That's why we dismember the baby. That's why we poison her, because we don't want her to live. We want her to die. When the mother's life's in danger, the very pregnancy itself, that is the problem we have to resolve. And we, in the pro-life community, we believe do the greatest moral good possible. Don't let two humans die. Save anyone you can. Before viability, you can't save the child, because there's no incubator for a 12-week fetus. You can't save the mom.
I'll defer. I absolutely agree with what you just said. The unborn are persons, and
Can't hear you.
There's no justification for killing an unborn child.
Others?
Should abortion be legal in the case of rape and so on? Of course. One might also ask whether girls below the age of consent should be forced to carry a fetus to term. But I would like to comment a little bit on choice of words in all this. In the whole barrage that runs through this room, pay attention to individual words. A mother is a woman who has one or more children. A pregnant woman is not a mother, but this is what is always pushed under there, so to make us feel different. A fetus is not a baby. A baby can be seen outside, and when it's born, it is a baby. And worst of all, because it has the greatest, it hides it best, is the term life. An organization, pro-life, Students for Life. If you are for life, are you standing with the students who marched on Sunday? For life, as they called it themselves. Are you helping people in danger? Are you seeing to it that our country has health coverage for all those who could not afford it? Pro-life, that's what it would be. This here is not. This is a religious attempt to force me when I'm not at all religious. Thank you.
Well, the good thing is no one up here has actually made a religious case for opposing abortion. So that being said, should abortion be legal in the case of rape? You could probably understand what my answer would be. But you know, what I find interesting, I get to travel around the world and I meet a lot of different people, and I've met a lot of rape survivors. And I wrote an article, in fact, if you go to radiance.life/the-heart cases, you'll see some of the research that I discovered. I was actually surprised to see the response and hear the response that I did from rape survivors, both those who were parents and those who were post-abortive. And they said the only thing that was redemptive in such a horrific, violent act is the child, even those who were post-abortive. And I actually kind of found that surprising. So when I did the research, I realized that there are about those who experienced the horror of rape and end up being pregnant, 40% of them still choose life. I expected that to be even lower. But as I talk to rape survivors and I hear them saying that the child is the only redemptive part, I understand it even more. See, what mainstream media is always throwing out there, that the natural follow-up to something so horrific is more violence. But we all know that violence doesn't ever remedy violence. As Seth said, what about the rapist? See, I'm a firm believer in redemption for all people, even those who commit horrendous crimes. I believe even the rapist deserves redemption. Yet in this, there's never the discussion about punishing the rapist. It's always about punishing the child. So we're talking about with the 926,200 abortions reported by Guttmacher last year, 1%. We're talking about 1%, which is always used to justify 100% of these abortions. Abortion is never used as a life-saving effort for women. In fact, former abortionists like Dr. Anthony Levatino will tell you the same thing. It is not a procedure to save the life of a mother. So I wish we would have different conversations about what truly brings healing to those who face the horror and violence of rape.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, you can't really generalize the experiences of all rape survivors. This particular rape survivor says that the redemptive part for me was a whole lot of therapy. I fortunately did not become pregnant because I am on birth control thanks to Planned Parenthood. But for me, my experience with this horrendous event was that I suppose if I were to have become pregnant, I would have felt punished. Having to carry for 9 months, having to pay for that, having to deal with my physical health and my mental health on top of having to deal with the tragedy that had just occurred, for me, that feels like punishing. And when we're talking about a dichotomy between a woman who can feel and think, who has a life to live and a job to go to and school and classes to attend, we also have to look at demographics, because by and large, when you look at younger people, because again, we're talking about younger people, suicide is a huge issue, especially for the demographics that we're talking about in this case, people in this age range. And if you look at sexuality, I myself am bisexual. Bisexual women, almost 2/3 of us will be sexually assaulted at some point in our lives, and 3/4 of people in the LGBT community are already suffering from some form of a mental illness. So I think when we talk about this issue, when we talk about whether we're punishing a child or punishing a mother, whether we're saving a life or whether we're not, we have to consider the fact that saving a life might mean allowing a woman who otherwise might have taken her life to get an abortion. What sometimes not punishing the mother means allowing her to live and to move forward, and that's not the decision for everyone. I respect everyone's right to choose what they want, but they need to have the ability to choose, not just in instances of rape and incest, but in all cases.
All right, thank you. Rebuttals?
Sure. So I would just say, to follow up on that, I think that we have to be clear here that the mother, no one I think who is opposed to abortion wants to force motherhood on anyone. Any woman who's pregnant has the same 3 choices any woman who has a born child has, and that is choices are to raise your child, to raise your child, to seek foster care or adoption, or to kill your child. So the same is true for a mother who's been raped. We're not saying she's forced to be the mother by any means. We're merely saying if an injustice has been met upon you, that does not mean you're justified turning to someone else and committing a crime against them. That's all we're saying. So that doesn't mean it's easy by any means to carry this child to seek adoption. That might be hard to do. But we are merely saying to kill someone for what happened to you is not moral. That is a crime. Another point what Dr. Holschuh said was he was criticizing the pro-life movement for not fighting against other crimes. This has raised a lot against those who oppose abortion. This is like looking at the American Heart Society and saying, what are you doing for cancer? They focus on heart disease, right? That is their mission, that's their goal. The pro-life movement focuses upon the greatest killing of human lives, which is abortion. We may have differing views on other issues, but we're focused on ending abortion, which kills over 50 million humans every year globally, according to Guttmacher.org. That's what we're focusing on. So yes, there are other issues to face, but that's not the focus of the anti-abortion movement, those who are pro-life. And one just final point that Reagan said was, she referred to women who can think and feel. She's referring to functions, things that we can do, and saying that's what makes you valuable. But realize this, we don't all think at the same level. Some have high IQs, some have low IQs. Some feel really deeply, some don't feel very much at all. If those qualities give you your value, we have to recognize we don't have those qualities equally, and there is no human equality. Those who think more or feel less, have more or less rights. The worldview she's building is one in which no human equality exists. That is dangerous.
Go ahead.
I just want to say that you're mischaracterizing greatly what I'm talking about when I say thinking and feeling. What I'm talking about is the fact that your brain is working. There are electrons moving in your brain. You can process pain. You can process thought. You can process emotion. You have those abilities. It's not you're too stupid to live. It's you are not alive yet.
Why does that matter, having the electrons firing?
Because when someone is declared by a hospital to be dead, it's not when their heart stops, it's when they go brain dead, when their brain no longer functions. So if we're talking about defining life, when a person is considered dead, that is when their brain no longer functions. So if a fetus doesn't have a functioning brain, by that logic, it is dead.
But at 7 weeks, you have electroencephalograms can detect brain waves. Would you oppose abortion at that point, at 7 weeks?
But it doesn't feel pain.
So which is it, feeling pain or having brain waves?
What I'm talking about simply is that we are punishing women. I was using that as an example. And if someone has been violently raped, I don't think it's appropriate to make the decision for them that they should have 9 months of their life, of their medical bills, that they have to then pay without any decision of their own. As he brought up earlier, 40% of these women choose to carry to term. They have that right, but the 60% who don't should have the same ability.
We support the mom. We support the mom killing the baby after birth, maiden rape.
I really think that you are taking this way out of the context that we're actually bringing it in. Every single comparison that you have used tonight has been it's either mischaracterized what I've said or taken it in a way where it's creating a false dichotomy.
Please demonstrate, because I don't want to mischaracterize.
Okay, so as I've stated multiple times, when we are dealing with someone who is attached to a person, when someone is feeding off of another person, that is not the same as a living human being who exists separately on their own. If we want to get rid of abortions, let's just induce birth. And if they survive, then it's viable, right? So why oppose abortions? Why not just induce birth?
All right.
Sorry.
Yeah, we're going to move on at this point. Thank you.
Can I just say, I'm sorry, I
Yeah,
just
so
want to
go
say
ahead.
one thing,
Yeah,
because you talked about experiencing the violence of rape, and
Yes.
I think that's horrible. I'm sorry that you experienced that.
It's okay, I'm a woman in college, it happens.
Yeah, unfortunately, I wish young men knew better
It's
how
not
to.
okay.
It's not okay.
No,
Yeah,
it's
it's not okay.
It's not, and I do want to tell you, for those of you who may not know, that there are great resources for those who experience that. There's optionline.org, there's pregnancy-decision-line.org, and there are other resources that you do need to get counseling, and it's not okay. Rape culture on college is not okay.
All right, we're going to move on. Next question. So what do you think we should do to better support women who find themselves in a crisis pregnancy after they choose abortion, parenting, or adoption? And we'll begin with Pam.
Oh, I love this question, because I'm a woman.
I think the greatest thing that we can do, women are our greatest resource for women. Women loving women, women supporting women, women having each other's back, each one reaching one. I think that is the greatest asset that we have in this country. And too often, women don't do that. We don't support each other when we should. I think that is one of the greatest resources that we have, is loving our neighbor, being there for the woman in front of you, actually being there to tell her the truth and love her the right way. I believe that we're gaining a lot of ground in this area, especially in the pro-life movement. I can give a great example. I was on the sidewalk one day. I gave information to a woman. She was not undecided. She was pretty clear that she was going to have an abortion. She went into the clinic. She had her abortion, but she had my phone number. About 3 weeks later, she calls me on the phone and she says, "Miss Pam, I went through with the procedure and it's been really tough ever since. I had to miss some work because I had some complications, and now I can't pay my rent because I don't have enough money, and because she missed some work." And I said, and she needed some help. And so I asked her, I said, "Well, hon, have you called the clinic to see if they have any resources available for you to help?" And she says, "Oh, that's a good idea. Let me do that." So she called the abortion clinic and they laughed at her. So needless to say, those resources aren't available on that side, but thankfully, we have them available. There are over 3,000 pregnancy centers, and you can find one in your area at optionline.org. There are over 13,000 federally qualified health centers and community health centers. You can find those at findandf2hc.org.
My friend Ryan were sick, the law would not force me to help him, right? I might feel compelled morally, but I'm not held responsible for his sickness. She's right in that. However, there's a difference though. And with abortion, it's not you and some stranger or a friend even, it's a parent and her child. The law does say you have obligations to your children. Children have rights against their parents, rights for nourishment, rights for protection. If you leave this happens all the time, which is tragic. And Megan Shug recently was found guilty in Michigan of locking her child in the closet and not feeding him. She was found guilty of child endangerment because she neglected her child, didn't feed him as she should, didn't clothe him as he should. He was sitting in his urine and his defecation. This was violating the obligations parents have to children. So yes, it's true, when two humans are involved, doesn't mean you're obligated to help that person, but if you have a child, the law says you must give basic care to your child. Not heroic things like donate a kidney, maybe, but you must give basic care, nourishment, and protection. That is established by law for all children, unless you're younger than 9 months gestation, too young to be born, then apparently you don't get rights. That's why this really is an act of ageism, stealing rights from those who are young.
That's totally not there. But apart from that, let me stick with the work. What can we do? We as society, so society should, through its laws and rules and practices, help. As I say it again, health insurance to all, support to the indigent. There's a lot that can be done. When the persons outside on the sidewalk shout, "We can help," well, yes, we know how much help that can be. And we all know what they cannot do. They cannot help through the next, not years, maybe decades before it's cured, before you get rid of the effects of that. It may be the child will grow up in lesser confidence. But deception apparently is always allowed in a good cause. So anybody who hears it, be alert. Judge for yourselves. Judge words. An example for what can be done in deeds, the protesters in Bloomington, some of them, now wear reflective vests as if they were construction workers. And of course, the people driving in will stop to listen because they think somebody is directing the traffic. This is deception. They do not stop going in, of course, but it harms people who are already in trouble. Thank you.
Go ahead.
we better support women who find themselves in a crisis pregnancy, those who may be post-abortive, those who choose to parent, or those who choose to make a loving plan of adoption? We always love. We love people. And the reason why many of us are motivated by love, yes, by faith. Some of us maybe have no faith. In fact, one of my friends, Kelsey Hazard, she's an atheist. And she's motivated by love too. I work with centers that are immersed in love. Pregnancy centers, 3,000 of them across this country. And they show women love all the time. Non-judgmental services, all free services, unlike Planned Parenthood, all free services. They provide the pregnancy options counseling, they provide ultrasounds, all free. Some of them even provide free prenatal care. The one I just visited there in Oklahoma City, Birth Choice of Oklahoma, free prenatal care to women. You will not find that in Planned Parenthood. Baby boutiques, you walk into these massive rooms and there's everything from cribs to clothes to diapers to formula, all of that. You will never find a baby boutique inside of Planned Parenthood. Maternity wear, maternity items, hundreds of thousands of these things given out to women, mothers, every year. Fatherhood counseling and mentoring, life skills training, I mean, the list goes on and on. In fact, maternity homes. I love when I hear, the mantra, pro-lifers don't care about people after they're born. Yes, we are the ones who actually do care about them after they're born. For instance, the maternity homes, 450 maternity homes across this nation. How many of them are run by Planned Parenthood or any other pro-abortion organization? 0. They're run by pregnancy centers and other organizations such as parachurch organizations. 450 of them who care for mother and child. So how do we better support women in all of these cases? The pregnancy centers that offer the post-abortion counseling, because many of those women were exactly where Pam was. They understand. They've been through it all. And that's why I wish our federal government, instead of funding death through Planned Parenthood to the tune of $500 million a year, would redirect some of that money to life-affirming pregnancy centers.
So speaking on the federal government, that's kind of my area of expertise. From a policy perspective, we have to think about the reasons why women get abortions. If you look statistically, most women who get abortions cite financial reasons as at least one of the reasons. So poverty reduction programs is one of the things that we can do to help women who are in a crisis pregnancy, because that, if you're looking to reduce abortions, that's the best way to do it. Increase welfare spending. Increase money for schools so that women don't end up in that situation of poverty. Increase the minimum wage. A lot of the people up here are pro-life, I'm pro-living wage. I think that that's something that's really important, and then these women would be able to support themselves, and finances wouldn't be an issue. It would just be an issue of deciding what is best for them, knowing that they can take care of a child, or knowing that they can't go through with 9 months of a pregnancy, whatever. Eliminating poverty in all of the ways that we possibly can is one of the best things we can do for women who are struggling in crisis pregnancy situations. If they choose to carry through paid family leave, not just maternity leave, but family leave, so that they aren't the ones who have to take off from their career, so that their husbands or their significant others can as well, if they choose. Providing and actually genuinely working towards universal health care so that it isn't a big expense to go through 9 months of pregnancy. Working towards universal pre-K so that they have somewhere to send their children once they're born, so they don't have to worry about taking off of work. I also think that if we want to address the issue that Pam brought up with her example of a woman who couldn't afford her abortion and was struggling to pay for rent, one of the other things we can do is repealing the Hyde Amendment, which is what prevents federal funds from going towards abortions. One of the reasons why Planned Parenthood has to charge money, one of the reasons why it is taking in and having these profits, quote unquote profits, is because all of the money that goes towards abortions they aren't getting that reimbursed the way they do for all of their other procedures.
Right.
And then women have to pay for that.
All right, Seth, you're...
Well, how do we support women? We don't lie to them. As Dr. Holshoe said, deception is not a good thing. And what's deceptive? Saying that's a clump of cells when that's a human being, that's your child. What's deceptive, saying this will unrape you when it certainly will not unrape you? Suggesting this might give you financial greatness when you're struggling with poverty? These are deceptive things we're saying and suggesting by keeping this legal and dangling this in front of women as a quick band-aid to truly bigger issues they're facing. Now, we must be clear here when we're talking about supporting women that the case against abortion is an objective case that would be true whether or not any anti-abortion person helped any woman. Because we could be the greatest hypocrites, abortion would still be wrong. Although thankfully that's not the case. And Ryan was talking about what the pro-life movement is doing, and it's great things. There are less than 800 abortion facilities, but there are more than 200,000 pregnancy resource centers helping people before and after not only pregnancy and birth, but also before and after abortion. You know, you do not need to believe in the gospel to be opposed to abortion. We've advanced a case tonight on non-theological grounds, philosophy and science. That's all you need. However, as a Christian, I can tell you good news, not only that abortion kills, but great news that there's also forgiveness for the things that we've done. And that's why I've never had an abortion. But I don't see myself in any way greater than any woman who has had multiple abortions. Because I have sinned against the same infinite God, and I'm forgiven only by the same infinite sacrifice of Jesus Christ's work on the cross. Now, you may not agree with that. That's okay. You don't have to agree with my theology to accept equality. So again, that's why I believe that we can offer forgiveness to those who've had abortions, but we can all oppose abortion because all of us, I think, know that looking around at us, we're all humans, and all humans have human rights. So what are we doing to help women? Certainly, we shouldn't kill their children. Again, that's what abortion is. Dr. Curtis Boyd, another abortionist, when asked about killing, he said, "Am I killing? Yes, I am, I know that." Warren Hearn speaks about the sensations of dismemberment flowing through the forceps in a D&E abortion. This is killing, and that's not helping women.
All right, rebuttals?
Talking about the funding for abortion, revoking the Hyde Amendment. Actually, Warren Buffett gives billions of dollars to Planned Parenthood in what's called a justice fund. So this funds abortion for low-income women. So, and also the young woman who went into the Houston Women's Clinic where I was talking about, she paid $50 for an ultrasound because ultrasounds aren't free at abortion clinics because the state requires the ultrasound. However, her abortion for $550 was paid for by the Abortion Fund Network. So that was a donor who gave money so that this young black woman could have this abortion. And then she couldn't pay her rent because she missed work. But Warren Buffett gives billions of dollars to Planned Parenthood. The National Abortion Federation receives funding from donors across the country who also make sure that women can have their abortions paid for as well. So the Planned Parenthood doesn't need government funding, and the Hyde Amendment does not need to be repealed.
Just out of curiosity, that ultrasound you said she did have to pay for, isn't that the kind of thing that you're advocating for when you talk about informing women, wanting them to have ultrasounds and things like that before they have abortions? Is that the kind of thing that the pro-life movement is advocating for, the thing that she had to pay for?
Well, they didn't advocate that she has to pay for it. It's abortion clinics and abortion organizations like Planned Parenthood that charges her for the ultrasounds.
But
So,
not the abortion.
and I do have a question though too, because both of you have said that this whole thing is nonsense about profit. This is Planned Parenthood's annual report on my iPad. Could you just read that line here?
It says, other charges in net
No,
assets
excess of revenues.
over expenses.
Right. And anybody who studies business, anybody in here studies business? What is another word for excess of revenues over expenses? Profit. And what is this amount here?
I think
That's in thousands, so it's 77.5 million. That's their
That's
profit. This
yeah.
is Planned Parenthood's annual report, and this is the problem when we talk about actualities. We mentioned the Hyde Amendment, wanting to repeal the Hyde Amendment. Those who would actually be disproportionately targeted would be those in the black community, as if there isn't already enough death in the black community. As I mentioned before, in New York City, more black babies are aborted than born alive. For every 1,000 born alive, 1,101 in 2014 in New York City were aborted. There is not a lack of access to abortion among the black community when abortion rates are up to 5 times higher. And what effectively would happen with the repeal of the Hyde Amendment, see, Planned Parenthood is, just like Margaret Sanger, very, very cunning. They know exactly what they're doing because they depend upon another revenue stream, and that's exactly what Medicaid is.
All right, we're going to move on. Next question. And should fetuses with disabilities or genetic defects be allowed and or required to be aborted? And we'll start with you, Alish.
Before viability, this is not an issue at present. After that, society must weigh the details. When survival after birth is expected to be short, pregnancy to term can be considered cruel to both the woman and the fetus. Expected lifelong serious disability may also play a role because the woman may look forward to a later healthy pregnancy and to children who will not suffer for life. This is more complex. One thing that it is not is what was attempted in this state to ban abortions when a fetus has deficiencies.
All right, Brian?
I have siblings with disabilities. I have a number of siblings with disabilities. And it always strikes me when I hear people talk as if their value is somehow more than those with disabilities, as if their quality of life is somehow better than. And how do you even measure that? It's all very subjective. I have siblings with disabilities, learning disabilities, physical disabilities. My sister was born without half her jaw, born without toes. I have godbrothers and godsisters who are Down syndrome, who are blind. In fact, I used to spend days and days and days. My mom's best friend lived right up the hill from us. She had adopted 9 children, Down syndrome, blind, and I learned to sing and to harmonize with Shelley, who was blind. And it's amazing because that's why I like using the word differently able, because although she was blind, she had a whole, she was almost overly compensated in a whole other area. So every human being is equal, regardless of their circumstances of conception and regardless of their perceived or actual disability. And I just want to give some historical context when we talk about making abortion mandatory for those who are disabled. Hitler required the disabled to be killed. In Nazi Germany, they required mandatory abortion, and they carried it out in Auschwitz. Joseph Mengele, who was, I guess he called himself a scientist, amazing what many people have done in the name of science. He performed abortions. In fact, when he fled Nazi Germany, what did he become when he moved to South America? He became an abortionist. Anyway, I have a really hard time with people talking about the suggestion or the mandatory requirement to abort those who are genetically different. We live in a culture that talks about tolerance and diversity, yet when we talk about somebody who happens to be genetically different, oh no, they don't have the right to live. See, the problem with equality is when we decide to become the arbiters of human value, there's no end to it. There's no end to the discrimination and death that ultimately follows from that arrogance of deciding that you have the ability to determine one's human value.
All right. Well, we're going to move to Reagan first. You'll have a chance to rebut.
I am lucky enough to have never actually interacted with anyone who is pro-requirement of abortion in any case. I can say right now that and I think just about everyone else I know in pro-choice circles is anti-eugenics. But that being said, I think if we say that we shouldn't allow fetuses with disabilities to be aborted, I think we're running down a slippery slope. Because then what happens when a woman wants an abortion for entirely different reasons, because she can't handle it physically or mentally or because of her finances, and then she finds out that the baby is going to be born with a disability, and now all of a sudden she can't have an abortion. I think when we assign motives and when we assume the motives of a person who is getting an abortion, I say it's not. And I don't think we should be practicing eugenics or requiring abortions in any case, but I also don't think that we should be restricting them.
So,
Dr. Holschuh refers to something being cruel to the child, maybe not to have an abortion. What is cruel to a child? Tearing her into pieces, sucking her through a tube with 10 to 20 times the power of a household vacuum cleaner to tear her soft flesh apart. That is cruel. What does a civil society do when you have humans who have special needs? Do we kill them? Do we help them? My sister-in-law, Catherine, is mentally and physically, she has special needs because of her cerebral palsy. She can't walk, she's on a lower developmental level mentally than many people her age. What do we do with her? I think we help her. People generally in society, they do that. They see her, my parents-in-law, with her in her wheelchair. They open the door for her because we realize if someone's more vulnerable, we give them more care, more help, because we understand a certain principle, and that is that we should seek to alleviate suffering while not eliminating sufferers. So if a kid has a special need, preborn or born, we help them. We try to limit their suffering. We don't kill them. A baby is born with anencephaly. She's going to die. So what we do is we help eliminate her suffering. We don't kill her. That's helpful for the child. It's also helpful for the mother. This kind of prenatal hospice care and palliative care after birth to babies who will die are certainly more dignifying for the child, not killing her. It also helps the mother. So what is our principle? Again, our principle should be help those who suffer, not kill the people who are suffering. I mean, again, just really, truly look around the room here. Who knows looking around here who has special needs? Who knows looking around here who has a difficult future ahead of us because of special needs that may come? We don't know. But we know we all have one thing in common, our humanness. If the fetus is a human, if you wouldn't kill a born child for having special need, you should not kill a preborn child for that special need. And again, we know scientifically she's clearly a human. Unless we're going to embrace prejudice and say that some humans different than us still matter, those younger than us, we should oppose abortion for any reason.
Thank you, Pamela.
I absolutely agree with what Seth just said, that, sorry. I agree with what Seth just said. The unborn are persons, and so we can't justify killing them for any reason. And I'll also use part of my time to speak to something that Reagan said. She said that we don't know the motives of these women. I believe that's how she said it, who are having abortions. But actually we do, because Guttmacher has done studies and research. And so I'll read this. It says, the reasons most frequently cited were that having a child would interfere with a woman's education, work, or ability to care for dependents. That was 74% of those who were surveyed. That she could not afford a baby now. That was 73%. And that she did not want to be a single mother or was having relationship problems. That was 48%. So we see that we do know the motives of women who are going in to have abortions. Again, what Seth said about disability, a lot of times doctors are wrong. I mean, there's so many times that we go to the doctor and they say one thing and then a test comes back and it's like, oh, you know what? We were wrong. Thank goodness you don't have that. The same thing happens in the womb. That's a presumption. There's never a doctor who's going to tell you with 100% definite, absolutely sure, yes, this is what's wrong with your child, because they would be liable for that. And so oftentimes doctors will push for an abortion because what if they're wrong?
Thank you. Rebuttal?
Rebuttal, two things. In general, as I can tell now, playing on emotions clouds the brain. This has been the case, of course, in the past, but we are at an age where students, at least at the university, learn to discern, stand back and weigh what has been said on the facts. The constant playing of horror stories and quarter truths and so on will not get us anywhere. Just one fact to be corrected now, even though it is not really germane, the whole argument wasn't. Under Hitler, abortions were banned and heavily punished because Hitler needed people, Germans, of course, superior people, to populate those parts of the world where they were going to rule. You have to see history a little differently.
That's actually not accurate. He did not want certain people to have abortion. He outlawed abortion among certain people, but he certainly mandated it in Jewish ghettos. It's also why in the, let me just read this specifically. It's in the page 1076 in Trials of War Criminals before the Nuremberg military tribunals. There were 14 Nazis who were found guilty of compelling or encouraging abortions. They were found guilty of abortion crimes. So yes, it was forced upon certain people, which is exactly what's happening here in America, where we look at nearly 1 million aborted, 60 million since Rome.
Thank you. We will move on. Next question. Should abortion remain legal when a fetus can feel pain? And we'll start with you, Ryan.
Let's see here. It's amazing. We find all kinds of reasons to justify our behaviors, don't we? We find all kinds of euphemisms to use to justify certain things. Well, when it comes to those who feel pain and that whole argument, I would say a human being's ability to perceive pain shouldn't be what we use to legitimize violence against them. Those, for instance, with congenital analgesia, for instance, they can't feel pain. So would it be okay to just sever their limbs? They can't feel pain. Why not? If the argument or the logic is, well, this human being cannot feel pain, therefore violence can be exacted upon them. It's pretty core logic, I think, to follow. I do think that abortion should be entirely outlawed, as it was in nearly every state before 7 supremely wrong justices ruled on Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton. And I will say this too, I should have said this earlier, I find it interesting that Justice Harry Blackmun, in his majority opinion in Roe v. Wade, continually invoked the 14th Amendment, which I just find ironic. An amendment that finally ascribed humanity to people of my complexion is then used to somehow justify the killing of another group of humans that are considered less than human. So when it comes to the whole, should it remain legal when a fetus can feel, I think abortion as a whole should be outlawed. I also find it fascinating that there are numerous polls that show the majority of Americans believe that abortion should be outlawed after 5 months of pregnancy. Some people say 20 weeks, 5 months is the same thing. There's a Huffington YouGov poll that found 59% supported the ban. Huffington is obviously not a conservative source. 59% supported a ban after 5 months. Back in 2013, when Wendy Davis was doing her stand-up in her sneakers, apparently the sneakers were more important than the children that she was saying are okay to kill. But in the National Journal poll, it showed 48% versus 44% supported such a ban. And in that same poll, women actually supported the ban more than men, 50% versus 46%.
All right, we'll move on. Reagan?
So I would take the opposite opinion. I would say yes, and I say so because we need to once again look at when we have a fetus that can feel pain, why is someone getting an abortion? The idea of why is the most important thing. So here's a direct quote from the Brookings Institution. It says that it is likely that a fetus could perceive pain before the 3rd trimester when most of the body structures it is unlikely that a fetus could perceive pain before the 3rd trimester when most of the body structures that are necessary to feel pain are growing. A fetus develops cordial function required for conscious perception of pain at 29 to 30 weeks. So that's the time span that we're talking about. And as I've stated before, slightly more than 1% of abortions are performed at 21 weeks or later. 21 weeks or later pregnancies, 21 weeks or later abortions are going to be your situations where they have found out there is some sort of last-minute complication, where they have found out that there is some sort of an issue. By and large, these are wanted pregnancies. So when we say we're going to draw the line at where the fetus can feel pain, what we're actually doing is we're not allowing for the movement in the issue that need be. And I also just want to make a really quick point about the argument that it's quote-unquote okay because they can't feel pain. It's not that it's okay because they can't feel pain. It's okay because the pregnant woman can feel pain and the fetus can't. It's okay because pregnant women's legal rights are being put up against the fetus's legal rights, and by and large, in the US legal system, historically, we have had a precedent that when two people's rights are at odds with one another, we stay out of it. That's the precedent, and that's how our system works. So when we talk about making things illegal or making things legal, we can't just say, this is what I personally believe and this is what I personally think about the issue, because again, we don't know the women's names, let alone their situations.
Right.
My name's
Seth?
Pam.
My name's Reagan, nice to meet you.
So, just to clarify, at the 6 weeks you already have pain receptors throughout the baby's body. By 18 weeks, the baby seemed to respond to pain in ways similar to adults, and actually they say that even earlier, the baby probably feels pain in a more intense way than we do because they lack the coping skills we have as born humans to deal with pain. But setting all that aside, again, what Ryan said is critical here. Why does it matter if you can feel pain or not? If someone shoots you tonight when you go to sleep, you won't feel it. Were you harmed? Absolutely, because you're a human, and killing you, even if you can't feel it, is a wrong thing. Or Ryan referred to people like Gabby Gingras, who has hereditary autonomic neuropathy type 5, meaning long phrase means she can't feel pain. Her parents had to put goggles on her face because she was scratching her eyes and was going to make herself go blind. Would it be wrong to kill Gabby? Absolutely, because she's a human being. That's what matters. So we ask again, Dr. Holscher refers to facts, and Dr. Holscher is right here. Don't get swept away in the emotion of this. Ask, what is the fact? Which side has produced scientific fact for their side? And I'll give you one more here. This is an embryology textbook, Ronan Rahili and Fabiola Mueller. Their textbook, Human Embryology and Teratology. They say, although life is a continuous process, fertilization is a critical landmark because under ordinary circumstances, a new genetically distinct human organism is thereby formed. Not an organ, part of the mother, an organism, a distinct being on her own. So we have a human, and what are we doing to those humans? We're tearing them apart. We can't even pass, again, the pain doesn't make it wrong, it underscores the barbarity. We can't even pass a modest bill in Congress to stop killing people who can feel pain. What are we doing? Lisa Harris, an abortionist, writes an article about aborting a child while she was pregnant. She says she grabbed the foot off the baby, ripped it off, dismembered it. She felt a thump in her abdomen. The first time she felt her own preborn baby kick, she was killing another baby. She supports abortion, but she's honest about what she's doing. Let's be honest here. We are ripping humans, some who can, some who can't feel pain, to pieces. Is that okay? That is not how civil society acts.
To answer the question, should abortion be legal when a fetus can feel pain? Absolutely not. I believe there's no justification for killing the unborn. I do want to speak for just a moment and share something. Abby Johnson's testimony. She worked at a Planned Parenthood clinic for 8 years. She was the director of that clinic. She saw an ultrasound-guided abortion on a 13-week-old fetus. When the instruments were inserted into the woman's uterus to suck the baby out of her womb, the fetus moved to the other side of the womb. Now, what does that say? That fetus was responding to a weapon that was being entered. It moved to the other side of the womb. So obviously, that fetus felt something. Mm-hmm. We cannot deny that. Right? Amen. I was about to say amen. Sorry. To what Reagan said, she said, the fetus can't feel pain, but the woman can. You are absolutely right. I felt a lot of pain after my abortion. And my name is Pam. She keeps reiterating that we don't know the names of these women. I hope that you do learn the names of these women.
What can be brought to your attention in motion and in fact and reason has already been said. I have nothing to add to this question. Thank you.
Any rebuttals?
I do. I find it interesting, Reagan, in an issue where people are constantly trying to humanize, you're actually dehumanizing, like you've said repeatedly, we don't know their names. We actually do. In fact, we know the post-abortive women's names. And in fact, Guttmacher had to know the names of every abortion patient that they surveyed in order to get their latest abortion incidents and services report. Every few years, Guttmacher does this survey of abortion facilities across the country to get an estimate of the number of abortions done. This latest survey was different. They actually surveyed the patients. They actually communicated directly with the patients. So they obviously knew who these women were in order to get the responses, and pretty detailed responses from the patients. So I just find that interesting that you're dehumanizing something that most people try to humanize all the time. We do know their names. To me, it's just another justification for somehow we can't speak to the issue. When you have a post-abortive woman over here to my right, I know hundreds of post-abortive women in my line of work. I know of hundreds of women who who were previous, well, that's what, and then there were none. I don't think this was even said. And then there were none actually pulls women out of the abortion industry. It's one of the most amazing ministries I've ever known. They know the names of these women. And I think we do the whole issue a disservice when we try to pretend that we don't know certain things. There's a lot that we do know. And it still comes down to, I think, the basic foundational truth. And that is, we have to decide, are we a society that is fine with attacking the most defenseless among us?
Again, I am speaking to this, I come at this issue from a policy perspective. As legislators, as people pushing for bills, as people who are involved in the legislative process, we don't know the names of every single woman having an abortion.
You also don't know the names of children who are abused in domestic violence. I mean, you keep saying from a policy perspective, and funny, because I don't think of politics and honesty as being synonymous.
That's what we're trying to change.
The point is, you don't have to know the names of those who are experiencing injustice. You don't know
And
the names
women
of those.
really are experiencing injustice, aren't they? Because when we are talking about this issue, we have, the 5 of us sitting up here trying to decide the fate of thousands of women in this country. And we aren't in their shoes. We can't speak for them.
Neither were the 9 men on the Supreme Court.
But they were speaking from a legislative perspective. And what they were saying was,
We the people.
what they were saying was basically by passing Roe v. Wade, that yes, we acknowledge we can't speak for these women, so we let them choose. The whole point of the pro-choice movement is saying we don't know them. We can't speak for them. We would like to know them. We would like to talk with them. The Guttmacher Institute would like to get their names and their stories and figure out their motives. We would like that, but we don't. We don't know every single person who's getting an abortion, and so we need to give them the right and the ability to make their own decisions. They're human beings and they are adults. Like these are people who have autonomy over their lives. They should have the ability to exercise it.
I just find it interesting because 7 justices out of 9, 7 males, decided Roe v. Wade. Isn't that patriarchy?
No, that is the Constitution. That is why we have the Supreme Court, so that people can interpret the Constitution. 7 males sat there and said, yeah, you know what? We don't know why women get abortions. We don't know these individual women. We can't keep letting the states make their decisions for them. And so they decided to allow those women. They acknowledged their own ignorance, and so they passed pro-choice legislation. That is what you're doing when you pass pro-choice legislation. You are acknowledging your own ignorance.
And denying science.
And
At
denying...
every single turn.
All right,
It's clear
we're
that
gonna move
this
on,
was
actually.
not neutrality, though. They said you can kill these human beings. We cloak it in neutrality, but they were not taking a neutral position. They said you can kill fetuses. That sounds pro-choice, but it's actually not. It's pro-abortion saying you may kill them. It's declaring this class of humans non-persons. It's not
all right,
neutrality.
we're going to move on. Next question. So this one is worded, I'm going to reword this a little bit differently because it presupposes a problem. So maybe is overpopulation a problem, and is abortion the solution if that is a problem? And we'll begin with you, Greg.
I would say that overpopulation is a problem, but abortion is probably not the solution. There are a lot of more effective ways to handle overpopulation. If you guys look at trends overall, we are consuming way too much as a society. We need to be living within our means, first of all, in terms of protecting the environment. And also, we need to be working to provide birth control for people. I think the solution is not abortion. I think the solution is birth control, because that's, first of all, more effective. Second of all, less costly. And third of all, it allows for people to choose when to have children, how many children to have, without having to go through the process of an abortion. Which, again, as I've been stating, this is about choice. And I think the implication that abortion is some sort of a solution to an overpopulation problem, again, it goes back to the idea of eugenics, that there is some way we need to be mandating abortions or advocating for abortions over other things in order to solve the problem of overpopulation. And while overpopulation is an issue and while it is something that we need to be addressing, abortion is A, not the most effective way to do it, and B, when we're talking about it, it's so much more complicated. And, you know, we brought up Guttmacher a lot. When you look at the reasons why women are getting abortions, none of them are saying, well, you know, there are too many people, guess I won't have this kid. You know, that's not the kind of thinking that women who are getting abortions do. That's just not the thought process. So linking abortion to overpopulation, I just don't think, I think it's really missing the actual issue.
Seth?
Granting that there may be a lack of resources, just granting that premise, is abortion a solution? Yes, if the fetus is not a human being. We keep going back to that, don't we? If this is not a human, then sure, this is a great way to solve the lack of resources. You don't have enough food, so kill someone. What if you have a family at home? You have 3 children, 2 born, 1 preborn, and you lack resources. What do? Do you kill any of your children? Or do you find a way to feed them? Again, that's what a civil society should do. We should find ways to find solutions that don't involve killing someone. But let's be honest again. You know, I have children at home. When my wife was still pregnant with our 3rd-born daughter, our 2nd daughter, our 3rd-born, she was not the most expensive one. Our toddler was. If I had a teenager at home, that'd probably be the most expensive one. If I lacked resources and I wanted to kill someone, I should probably kill the teenager. But we don't do that. Again, why? Because we know you don't kill someone because you lack resources. That's not how a civil society operates. We get creative, we find solutions, we don't kill people. Is the fetus a human? We have not heard any evidence tonight against that. So I think we have to say this premise stands. If the fetus, the embryo, is a distinct, living, whole human. So let's not kill them. If Indiana lacked resources, they said, we want to kill everyone in, in Bloomington, but put all the good resources in West Lafayette, we'd say, no, that's a problem. Leave Bloomington alone. You don't harm humans here because of what's going on in West Lafayette, right? So again, what matters is, are we humans, not what resources do we lack? We keep coming back to that. Again, so as we're wrapping up, we're coming together, bringing some threads of this discussion together. Just ask yourself, which side has scientific evidence for their claims? Which side is making assertions? Which side is building an objective case? Which side builds a case based on truly stories of emotions? And which side is working toward a society in which injustice is necessarily uprooted? Which side is building a case of a necessary injustice? Which side rings true with what you know is true? Which is that all humans are equal. And I think it's clear that's one side, the side opposed to abortion.
I think the first thing that we would have to determine is who decides if overpopulation is a problem. Again, I think that Reagan made a lot of really good points, and I can absolutely agree with a lot of what she said. Abortion is absolutely not the solution to overpopulation because there's no justification for killing the unborn or any other person as far as that goes. And our standard of living is an issue. We're consumers. This country consumes so much of the world's resources, and yet we don't make most of them. So, that's something that we do need to consider, and that does need to change. So, in this discussion and in this debate, I think most of us up here could probably actually agree on this one, so that's nice. Maybe.
Well, is abortion a solution to overpopulation? I think it is a trumped-up issue. No, the numbers of abortions are small and they're not likely to grow, and not in other countries, we're not making them. No, as people become secure in food and livelihood, they have fewer children. The current consensus appears to be, and only reading that barring climate catastrophe, major atomic war, disastrous worldwide epidemic, and other such events, the worldwide population may peak around 9.7 billion. Some developed countries are already losing indigenous population and are held in place merely by immigration. Germany's indigenous replacement rate currently stands at 1.5. You know the general assumption is 2.1 for replacement. But immigration keeps the overall population stable. Japan, set against immigration, is shrinking and rapidly aging. We should instead help the underdeveloped countries, which we can do in various ways, so that their children do not starve or their children's brains do not develop fully, and that the parents practice contraception and women's rights. That is how you can reduce it all.
Thank you. And Ryan?
Overpopulation is actually the DNA of the eugenics movement. I find it interesting because you mentioned eugenics, Reagan mentioned eugenics several times, and yet Planned Parenthood never severed its DNA, its eugenic DNA. I mean, the very same vile pseudoscience, the very same vile racist and elitist pseudoscience that spawned the Holocaust also spawned Planned Parenthood. And so when Planned Parenthood continually gives out awards, the Maggie Award they call it affectionately, the Margaret Sanger Award, are they really separated from their history? Are they really separated from the DNA that brought them into being? Of course not. I mean, overpopulation, first of all, is a myth. You can fit every person on this planet in the land area in Alaska with room left over. All the doomsday predictions from all the overpopulation evangelists, from Paul Ehrlich to, even going back earlier to Thomas Robert Malthus, the Malthusian theory, which believed, the globe is going to be standing room only. Every single one of those predictions, and Al Gore's as well, have bombed. Every single one of them. We don't have an overpopulation problem. We have a perception problem. The way that we perceive the value of every human being. But the American Eugenics Movement, I find it interesting. There's a quote here from one of the founders of the American Eugenics Society, Frederick Osborne, and he said that birth control and abortion are shaping up to be the greatest eugenic advances of our time. The American Eugenics Movement, undeniably racist, understood that abortion was a component of population control. And it still is a component of population control. They just dressed it up in nice little euphemisms, like reproductive justice and reproductive freedom. But it's absolutely still a core part of what the eugenics movement now basically living in an organization, a billion-dollar organization called Planned Parenthood, that has not severed that timeline. It's still the same thing. They just make it pink and fun and loud.
All right, rebuttals? Oh, no rebuttals this time.
We all agree.
Okay. All right, well, last question then. This will give us a little more time, hopefully, for audience questions. So, how are race and ethnicity related to the issues surrounding abortion? And we'll begin with Lisa.
So we've already made reference tonight to Margaret Sanger and her Negro Project, which was to eradicate minorities, primarily Negroes. She actually wrote in a letter to Dr. Clarence Gamble, "We do not want the word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population." It's very shocking, right? We ought to all be shocked by that, whether you're for or against abortion. We ought to be shocked by that. Now we know that maybe not everyone who works for Planned Parenthood is motivated by this, but still, as Ryan said, the eugenics practices are still there. They've not severed their tie with eugenics practices, but they're still severing babies' bodies. That's what they are doing every single day. And Ryan already referenced that more black babies are killed in New York City than are born. This is a great tragedy. African Americans make up maybe 13% of our population, but about 36% of our abortions. This is the greatest killer of our black brothers and sisters in America. That ought to concern us. But even if we rewind the clock back further, we see really what is happening in the abortion debate is the same worldview that has animated racism for a long time. Go back to 1858, the famous Stephen Douglas and Abraham Lincoln debates. What did they debate? They debated whether all men are created equal meant all men, white and black, or only white men. Abraham Lincoln said all men meant all men, white and black. Stephen Douglas said, I'll quote, "I hold this government was made on the white basis by white men for the benefit of white men and their posterity forever and should be administered by white men and none others." He wanted to build and continue his white supremacy. Now, how is that related to abortion? Because we're debating the same question. Does all men mean all, or just some of us? I hope tonight we can finally take the march forward, truly the next big step in civil rights, a big leap, and say all truly are created equal. That ought to be our goal. Black, white, rich, poor, born, preborn, all are equal.
All right, Pamela?
Sure. Seth said a lot of what I was going to say, actually.
Sorry.
That's fine. I mean, it's the facts. I mean, what else can we say? 79% of Planned Parenthood clinics and we keep saying Planned Parenthood because they are the largest abortion provider in the country. There are other privately owned clinics, but Planned Parenthood, by and large, is the abortion giant in this country. So 79% of Planned Parenthood's clinics are in minority neighborhoods in this country, and that is intentional. You cannot say that it's not. It is absolutely intentional. The largest Planned Parenthood in the Western Hemisphere in Houston is in a minority neighborhood. It is across the street from the University of Houston. So it's got 2 of its favorite populations walking in its doors every day. So yes, absolutely, it has racial and ethnic roots. It's eugenics all the way. Still, it has not severed its ties.
There is no way I can make you believe anything different. There is absolutely no racism at Planned Parenthood. This is plain ridiculous, but you're used to hearing this. You will hear it in the future again. Race in itself does not play a major role, but the cultural environment does. Neighborhood, family, congregation, and society. One hears at times that in certain ghettos, as one might still call them, some teenage women may be proud to be pregnant regardless of the consequences. It gives them status in a miserable life situation. What are the chances of the baby having a good life? We must think independently and help that these situations do not exist. We must help all Americans, regardless of their race, and we must overcome the unjustified influence of religious groups. It could be Islam, it could be anything you want to look at over such decisions. Thank you.
Right?
Race and abortion. Wow, there's a lot to unpack, and I only have a minute and a half. It's going to be hard. I will say this, that sometimes secularists are far more religious than those who claim to be Christian. So that being said, there is so much about race and abortion. It's almost like denying the 20th century. It's almost like denying that the American Eugenics Society existed, and one of their greatest exports was racial hygiene theory. Yes, of course, race and abortion are inextricably tied. I mean, the fact that Margaret Sanger in 1939, through Planned Parenthood, launched the Negro Project, and it was specifically to severely reduce or to eliminate the birth rate of poor blacks who were targeted. I mean, you had W.B. Du Bois, who was the co-founder of the NAACP, for instance, who was an instrument of Planned Parenthood. In fact, Margaret Sanger was a genius. She knew exactly what to say in private, what to say in public. She knew who to shill for Planned Parenthood. And she had influential African Americans who did that. W.B. Du Bois did that. In fact, he compared the quality of human beings with the quality of produce, because that's what we should do all the time. Reduce human beings down to a cucumber or to, a head of broccoli. But this is what they do. It's the effort to dehumanize. Race and abortion are so inextricably tied. Our organization, the Radiance Foundation, launched the first public ad campaign to deal with abortion's hugely disproportionate impact in the black community. In Atlanta, we launched billboards, which the campaign was called TooManyAborted.com. We dared to actually deal with the huge impact of abortion in the black community, where abortion rates are up to 5 times higher. We talked about fatherlessness, where 72.3% of black children are born to unmarried mothers. We talked about the poverty that ensues from that. We talked about all these issues, and yet you have Planned Parenthood just a few months ago who tweets out, black women are better off, are safer to have an abortion than to birth a child. You tell me that race is not involved with Planned Parenthood, with their 79% of their abortion facilities located within walking distance in minority neighborhoods. There is a deep history, and to deny that is to deny so much documentation. The two are inextricably tied together.
Okay, next, Reagan.
So I said before, I'll say it again, the founding feminists were kind of the worst. You brought up earlier Abraham Lincoln.
A lot of people don't know this, but Abraham Lincoln actually, if you look at his speeches that he gave in Illinois by comparison to the speeches that he gave in slave states, he would change his position on slavery based on what state he was in. Every system that we have in the United States was built on the bodies of Native Americans and the backs of black slaves. It's an unfortunate situation. The fact is that every system we have is racist. It's just a part of it, and it's something that we need to actively fight. But saying that Planned Parenthood and that abortion is unique in that is absolutely flawed. Especially when you consider the ties between abortion and poverty. Like I said earlier, 66% of people who get abortions say that it has something to do with finances. When you deal with poverty in people of color in their communities, you're dealing with the effects of redlining that are still today being seen, still creating segregation today. And when you have school systems that are built on property taxes, you see decreased ability for success, you see increased poverty. When we talk about the wage gap, I know a lot of people like to say 77 cents on the dollar is the wage gap. That's white women compared to white men. In reality, when you go to black women, when you go to Hispanic women, by comparison to white men, you're looking at somewhere in like the 64 cents on the dollar. So absolutely, this is tied to race. But it is not the only thing that is tied to race, and it is especially tied to poverty. And in a system that keeps people of color down in terms of the economy, you're going to see people of color getting more abortions, and you're going to see an institution like Planned Parenthood going where it sees a need. It's going to go to the poor communities. Now, some things that we can do to prevent that. First of all, we don't just call out racism here. We call it out in our school system. We call it out in our police system. If we're really pro-life and if we really do care about people of color, we need to be calling out every racist system, not just the racist system that we personally oppose.
Time up. We want to, so now we'll actually have a chance for rebuttal, and then we're going to move to questions down the line for a final statement. Okay? So, rebuttals, go.
Yeah, I do need to respond to a few things. First of all, we're all people of color, unless white people in here are transparent. We're all people of color. We want to be transparent, but no one in here is actually not a person of color. Anyway, Abraham Lincoln, what you missed there is that there was a time progression. As time progressed, his worldview changed. And one of the major reasons why his worldview changed was because of Frederick Douglass, one of my childhood heroes. Frederick Douglass, former slave abolitionist who helped reshape the conscience of Abraham Lincoln. And that's why it wasn't because of where he was. If you look at the progression from the debates, Douglass-Lincoln debates, to some of his, obviously the Emancipation Declaration and the one that actually existed in DC before the Emancipation Declaration, it was because of Frederick Douglass. And I would like to also say Frederick Douglass, who reshaped his conscience, was conceived in rape. Now when you say every system we have...
I do have one question. Why then, if he cared so much about black people, did he only free the slaves in the rebelling states and not the border states, like my home state of Kentucky? Why did he, if everything that I've read about Abraham Lincoln said that his main concern was keeping the Union tied together, and he didn't seem to care at all about black people, why wouldn't he free all of the slaves?
Well, that would be from someone who doesn't actually understand the life of Abraham Lincoln. I mentioned there was an emancipation prior to the Emancipation Proclamation. It was when slaves were emancipated in DC. So yes, he did care about slaves being emancipated. He also cared about keeping a nation which was falling apart at the seams. What do you as the president do to keep that together? And so there were serious considerations there. The other thing you mentioned is that every system in America is racist. I know, because I hear on college campus all the time, somehow we're more racist today than it was in the 60s, which I find almost amusing. Every system is racist except for the one industry that kills for a living, Planned Parenthood. I just find that interesting to deny that. And abortion has never reduced poverty, never. Poverty was 10% among women in 1972 before Roe v. Wade, and rose to 15.5% under Obama's administration. It does not reduce poverty, it actually perpetuates and exacerbates poverty. Because what it does is it requires the father, especially with the welfare state, to be out of the home, leaving a vulnerable family in a vulnerable community, and Planned Parenthood loves vulnerable communities.
Reagan?
Yeah, just briefly, I wasn't saying that abortion solves for poverty. I'm saying that people who get abortions tend to be people in poverty, and you have higher poverty rates when you have higher wage gaps, when you have the effects of redlining, when you have worse school districts, and when you have racist systems that make it more difficult for you to get a job, when you have a low minimum wage that affects everyone regardless of race, when you have... Oh, is that on?
Thank you, I appreciate it. Did everyone hear that? I was pretty passionate. I figured most of
Do it again, do it again.
Yeah, just yelling it. But basically, I'm not denying that Planned Parenthood has a racist history. Just about everything has a racist history. And I think that we should fight the racism and the racist history of Planned Parenthood the same way that we should fight the racism and the racist history of all institutions. And the point that I was trying to make was just that when you see policy advocates, when you see the Republican Party go out and talk about race in terms of abortion, by and large, I'm not calling out anyone here because you guys are single issue people, you care very much about this, and so you're going to be consistent, but a lot of the time we see inconsistencies. And if we really do care about people of color, then we've got to make sure that we're calling out racism everywhere, not just in the times when it's politically convenient and when it fuels our narrative.
I'm not sure who claimed that they were single-issue people here.
No,
So
I'm
some
saying that you
assumptions
guys
going
are
here.
focused on this one issue, and so you're going to be consistent in this panel. But
Well, okay, we're out of time for that rebuttal, but we're gonna have a chance now for everyone to have 2 minutes going down the line. So I'd like to start with you. Have the final statements wrapping up, kind of your conclusions. You can address previous questions that have come up and previous statements, but we want to stick to this time, and then we'll have an open mic for the audience members. Thank you for all your patience, audience members, and thank you for all your statements. And so go ahead, Pam. Start us off.
Sure, I'll keep it really brief. So I think one thing that, as we leave here tonight, one thing that we need to decide is the law of the land going to determine what we believe? Or are we going to research and study for ourselves? What is our foundation built on? Our own personal belief system. What is it built on? And I think as we leave here, that's something that we need to decide for ourselves. And I hope that tonight you heard something that maybe moved you to study and to look and to find out for yourself what you believe. What do you know? Because an informed woman is an empowered woman. That is so important as women. I'm a woman, so I'm going to speak for women. As a woman, that you be informed. Be informed. Don't take someone else's word for it. Don't take my word for it. Go, look, find out for yourself, because I did. I did not always hold this position. So another thing that I want us to determine as we leave here, are the unborn people or are they property? Because if they're not people, then they're just things, which makes them property.
With the exception of the last sentence, I can agree with everything, and I wholeheartedly agree with everything that you have said. And this in spite of the fact that during the discussion that preceded this, we were obviously on opposite sides. It is this: learn, find out, weigh yourself, and do not try to simply reinforce what you emotionally are carrying with you. Learn. Progress. This is our task as humanity. And beyond that, I will leave it to you. Yours is the future, not mine.
You, Ryan.
I think it's a good thing to be able to have a discussion with different perspectives. I wish this would happen more often. Obviously, there are some slight differences. I don't know if you've noticed from those perspectives, but I love being able to have a dialogue. Thank you, Students for Life here at Indiana University. Thank you, and the College Democrats. Thank you. I would say, though, that I'm obviously very passionate. All of us are passionate about this, and for different reasons. Obviously, mine is deeply personal, having been adopted and rescued. having been loved by two parents who didn't know what the heck they were getting into. They had 3 biological children and adopted 10. I was the first one, so it obviously went well, and they kept adopting year after year after year. So we were a family of 15. That courses through my veins. So when someone says, why are you speaking about this issue? Aside from the fact that men are 50% responsible for the biological equation, I have a lot of reasons to speak about this. Every human life has a purpose, whether you're planned, whether you're unplanned, whether you're able or differently abled, whether you're red, yellow, black, brown, or white, whatever. Off-white, actually. Doesn't matter what your color is. Doesn't matter what your circumstances are. You have equal, irreplaceable, irrevocable value. And it's why I will passionately fight for the least of these. It's why I will fight for women who are constantly told by an industry that they are not strong enough. And I'm married to an incredibly strong woman. I love her to death, my wife Bethany. I think women are the strongest stuff on earth. Does anybody else agree with me?
Yes.
In here? Come on, because they give birth. I watched it, and I could never do that. They're the strongest stuff on earth, yet you have an industry that says you can't face the unplanned. Yes, you can. Most of life, in general, is unplanned. We face it all the time. Adversity makes us better human beings. But I will always fall on the side that every single life has purpose.
All right, thank you. Reagan?
So, is abortion wrong? Maybe. Depending on who you ask, the answer might be yes or no. From a moral standpoint, everyone has their own justifications, their own definitions of life, their own definitions of personhood, their own ideas based on different studies where everyone has their own facts to bring up about pain. But I think the root of this that I want everyone to take away is the idea of should abortion be regulated and restricted. And regardless of whether you think it's wrong, the answer has to be no. The fact of this debate proves that point. The fact that there are people who believe one thing and another thing proves that there isn't a consensus, proves that you need to have the freedom of choice to make that decision and to leave it up to the person who's in that situation and who knows it best. The legal case, as we've talked about earlier, there is a precedent for it, there's Supreme Court precedent for it, and the legal case for abortion allows us to have the ability to choose. So that if, God forbid, I were to end up in that situation, or one of the other young women here were able to, we would be able to look at our own question, is abortion wrong, and decide from there, and not have that choice made for us. Because as we've already learned, more abortions tend to happen when the laws are more restrictive. We need to continue supporting women in every possible way, whether that's with paid maternity leave, whether that's with trying to decrease the wage gap, whether that's with providing abortions, whether that's with providing birth control. In every possible way, we need to be supporting our women, and that is the only way that we can really work towards an equal society, where women matter just as much as men.
Great, thank you. And Seth?
I began tonight by saying I believe that all humans are equal. That means men and women. We should expect the same of them. What if a man has sex with a woman, she gets pregnant, says, hey, I consented to sex, but not to the pregnancy? We would say, that doesn't matter. You choose to engage in the action, you must deal with the consequences in a healthy way, which is not leaving, which is giving, it is at the minimum, it's giving financial support. All we're asking tonight is treat women the same way. We would, if the man withholds the support, we say that's wrong, but what's even worse? If the man would intentionally kill that preborn child by slipping a drug to the mother to kill the child, that's even worse than merely withholding support. And that's what abortion is. It's not merely withholding support, it's intentionally killing. Why not expect the same of men and women, regardless of their situation? Neither fathers nor mothers should intentionally kill their children. Now, Reagan said everyone has their own definitions. It's true. The court of the German Empire said Jews were not persons. Here, American Law Review, we said the Native American was not a person. We said the African American was not a person. As recently as the 19th century, British common law said women were not persons with respect to rights and privileges. Everyone has their own definitions. There's one way to eradicate this injustice. That's to set aside those subjective definitions and say, you know what? Let's move to an objective criteria. Are you human or not? Is this pen a human? No. How do we know? Science tells us they're not human. Scientific evidence shows this is not a human being. Is Reagan a human? Am I a human? Yes. Scientific evidence shows that we are. That's what we have to ask. The entire case, again, is boiled down to this. It is wrong to intentionally kill innocent humans. Elective abortion does that. Therefore, elective abortion is wrong. So what is the better way? The better way is to look at society and say, you know what? We're really different. Some tall, some short, some with great abilities, some struggling with various abilities, some with the various skin tones we've heard about. Mine is pasty white, I know that, with various skin tones. We should just say, you know what? It doesn't matter. If you're a human, you count. You are equal to all other humans.
All right. Thank you very much, panelists. I do want, let's give them a round of applause.
Women who are struggling with a decision about parenting, adoption, and abortion every day. I have the blessed privilege of being a mother. I have a 19-week, 2-day baby inside of me right now. And I read an article a few weeks ago, Reagan, about a woman who is on the pro-choice side. And she admitted that she believes that life begins at conception. And she said that the only reason that it would be different to have a miscarriage and abortion is the woman's understanding of what the value of that life is. And I know that when we talked about, when life begins and when conception is, sorry, I don't remember the question exactly, but you were, the question I believe was the third question, when does human life begin? And you said that it doesn't matter when life begins. So
I didn't say it doesn't matter when life begins. I said
I wrote a direct quote, but I'll
no, I said it doesn't matter what my opinion of when life begins is, because it's up to the woman and her opinion of when.
So are you saying that you believe that it is a relative understanding of when life begins? It has nothing to do with science.
It is because life has multiple definitions. There are multiple reasons why you can consider life to have begun. So you can consider life to have begun at conception. You can consider life to have begun at, I'm just going to say it, sperm are alive. You can say that life begins at erection. It really just depends on your own perception of what life is. And because there is a spectrum, I think that is mostly what I was trying to get across with my statement of it doesn't matter what my personal opinion is, because at the end of the day, it's up to the woman and her morals and her decision.
Okay, what is your personal opinion, and where does that land with your understanding of morality?
So I was raised Catholic. I went to Catholic school. I was taught that life begins at conception. I reject that notion. I think that for me personally, if I were to make that decision, I would say, for me, viability.
In 24 weeks?
Meaning, whenever, depending on the situation, whenever, I would see, because advancements in technology mean that viability happens at different times. So I don't want to put a specific time stamp on viability, but again, I really don't want to get into my personal opinion, because it's my belief that my personal opinion only matters if I'm the one getting the abortion.
Okay. And so then...
Well, actually, we're going to limit one question
sorry.
to, because we have a bunch of people who
Thank
want
you.
to speak. Thank you.
I wanted to just first thank everyone for being here. I really appreciate it. And very eye-opening. I'm going to squat a little bit. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Thank you. Maybe not that tall. Okay. I just wanted to ask you a question in the sense that my sister once had an ectopic pregnancy, and she almost died.
Who are you
Who are you asking?
Pro-life. Thank you. So anyone. So a lot of people have kind of said the same general thing. So every ectopic pregnancy is non-viable at all, no matter what. No matter what happens, there's never a way that has happened, that will happen under now medical circumstances, that a ectopic pregnancy, that fetus will survive. If my sister hadn't gotten what is commonly, the same technique that is used as an abortion, after 13 weeks, she would have died. And, you were saying that as when you have an abortion, you are ripping this fetus from limb. That's what would have happened to my sister. She would have bled out internally and died, and I would have lost my sister at an extremely young age.
Yes.
Like, how, please, if you really think that life, even though it's not viable, is still worth my sister dying, I would please love for you to look me in the eye and tell me that, because that is my sister, and that is a life that I cannot lose.
Pamela? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. What the procedure that your sister had was not an abortion.
Right.
An elective abortion and the treatment for an ectopic pregnancy are not the same. There is no ma'am. There is no abortion clinic.
It
Listen to
can
me.
be suctioned
Let me
out of
finish.
the fallopian
Let me
tube,
finish.
and that's exactly what
Ma'am.
happened to my sister.
Let me finish. There is no abortion clinic in this country that will touch a woman who has an ectopic
It
pregnancy.
wasn't an abortion clinic.
Exactly.
It was an emergency, and the same procedure was used.
There's a method and a procedure. It is not an elective abortion. Your sister, really, this is important for you to understand. Morally, it's important. Your sister did not have an elective abortion.
Okay, but the thing is, each one of you has said that that is a life, that you cannot kill that
No,
life.
ma'am.
Let me add on to that what Pam is saying, right? Like, morality is not merely what the action is, it's the intent behind it as well, right? So if I take Reagan's computer, it may look, borrowing and stealing look the same, right? My intent is different in it, right? So we can't rule out intent in this.
But the thing is, you're still saying
second.
that it is a cluster of cells that is life, and so that doctor murdered that baby.
Let me just explain, sorry. I am sorry for the loss of your niece or nephew, and I'm sorry for what happened to your sister, but no one here thinks your sister ought to have died, because when you engage in an action and foresee the child will die, that's not the same as an action where you foresee and intend the child's death. If this room is on fire and I run out and I'm dragging someone with me to save them, I may see Ryan, who I can't carry with me in the flames. I know Ryan will die. I foresee his death, but I don't intend his death. The fire does. That is different though than me shooting Ryan, in which I foresee and intend his death. The doctor saved your sister. The ectopic pregnancy is what caused your niece or nephew's death. And so we say that's a grave loss, but no one here thinks, I don't think, at least on the anti-abortion side, that your sister ought to have died. We are justified in saving the woman even if we foresee the child's death. That's not the same as foreseeing and intending. Like if I shot someone and foresaw and intended their death.
Can we have this
I've had one.
respond, please? Just
I've had one. Ectopic pregnancy. Please listen. It was traumatic. And my life almost ended. All right? If you leave a fetus in a fallopian tube, the fetus will die. It's not viable in the sense of what we're talking about, normal pregnancy. Not only that, before this happened, I had a normal miscarriage. So in essence, I had two in me. One miscarried, and they almost lost my life. And the other one, I understand. I would love to talk to you afterwards. It has nothing to do with abortion. It has nothing to do with abortion. An ectopic pregnancy, a fallopian tube cannot expand and carry a baby. It would not have lived. It's not the same. I'm sorry.
All right, next.
You're right.
Next question, thank you.
This is for the pro-choice people. I would like to know why, if you're pro-choice, when a woman comes to the clinic and a pro-life person approaches that person, whether they're in the green vest or on the sidewalk or what, why do you rush over and interrupt that conversation that's trying to be had if you're truly pro-choice?
I think
you're better to take this.
The point, as much of the reason, like part of the reason of why escorts are there, is to protect incoming patients from harassment. They have gone through these thoughts. They are not coming in without having given this any thought. and to help you even more. And there is no point, as you can see here tonight, to have a discussion between two views of abortion right out there in the parking lot. These people are under stress already. They are already making this decision. Inside, there is a requirement for a very extensive interview to probe whether that patient is truly determined to have this procedure. Of course, it makes it ridiculous to think that Planned Parenthood attracts people to make money. That the purpose is, and the physician certainly would not touch a patient who is not totally convinced and that does not state this very clearly. So the thought processes are all there. The harassment is to tell somebody who has gone through this, don't kill your baby today. For that person, that is nothing but hurtful. It is not making a change. You are already a mother. No, that is just the opinion of the group outside. That is not everybody's in the world, and it cannot be for the person there who has already gone through all that pain and thinking.
Next question?
Hi. I would like to know. There's
Who
so
are
much.
you asking first? Or
So,
which
yes.
side?
So, okay. I'll boil it down to the point. There's so much that can be said about this, but I boil it down to one question, and I'm asking this question towards the pro-abortion side. Sorry to leave you guys out a little bit. But so, I'd like to put you guys, you two, in their shoes and ask you, at what point are you going to side with them and argue with them that no, you should not kill your baby? And how is your argument going to be any different than theirs? Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm.
Sorry, what age?
Yeah. Huh?
What age?
What do you mean?
What age? At what age are you going to side with them? So basically, what you're saying is.
Yeah, I'm a little confused.
So rephrase your question.
Right,
I think I understand what you were saying. Let me see if I can rephrase your question saying, if there's an age
So
which
obviously there's a line being drawn here between human and inhuman. Okay, and if this is a vertical line, you know, what's to stop us? Dare we even start to draw this line? Because if you draw this line, you can then move it. All right? What is going to stop people from moving that line to 1-year-old? How about 2 years? Dr. Holsha, would you do 3 perhaps? Maybe 4 or 5? Where are you going to stop that line? Where are you going to side with them and say, this is wrong? I hope you understand my question.
After the baby is born, I would say that would probably be the line.
Why?
Because then it is no longer attached to a woman, it's no longer a part of her body, and so therefore she has the ability to give it up for adoption, she has the ability to raise it herself, she has the ability to have a friend raise it, she has the ability to live without it. But up until it is born, she does not have the ability to live without it unless she has an abortion. So her only option, if she wants to live without it, is to have an abortion. And I do also want to point out the distinction here, something that I didn't say earlier. In this debate, when it's you and me, when we're talking, there's a biological difference. You know, I'm a woman, you're a man, and equality in this issue.
There are also
can't-
racial differences.
let her finish, please.
And equality between us on this issue can't exist because at any point the father of my hypothetical child can walk away and it's frowned upon and we don't want that to happen, but he always has the option to leave. But if a fetus is attached to your body, you don't have the option to leave unless you have the option to have an abortion. So in a sense, the only way when you can really have equality in terms of the issue of pregnancy is to allow abortions, because That's the only way when both parties have the option to walk away. Men can walk away at any point. Women can't.
All right, next question.
Hi. This is kind of for the whole panel, but more specifically the pro-life side of things. So Reagan gave her opinion on the overpopulation conversation on contraception, and the pro-life movement is largely geared towards Catholic or evangelical motivations. So how specifically would a pro-life movement accept contraception or look towards contraception as a way to reduce the number of unwanted pregnancies?
Go ahead, Pam, to start.
As a woman, and I'm not Catholic, I tend to not get in this conversation with people that I don't have a relationship with. And so publicly, I do my best not to speak to that. But personally, my opinion about contraception is I don't want synthetic hormones put into my body. I mean, if people won't eat synthetic hormones in their chicken, you know, with all the crunchy granola people around these days, I really don't want that crap put inside of me. So, or a device inserted into my cervix that you know is in there for 5 years and I have no idea how it works. You know, I mean, even a doctor can't really tell you how the Mirena IUD works properly. So, you know, personally, I don't advocate for birth control, but I do not press that issue with people that I don't have a relationship with.
Obviously, the Radiance Foundation fully supports what is truly comprehensive sex education, teaching on all the possibilities out there and all the ramifications. What is sad is that many are not told of the physiological consequences of hormonal birth control, for instance, and that it increases a teenager's risk of triple-negative breast cancer, for instance. There's a great movie called Hush Film. If you go to hushfilm.com, I would encourage you to watch it. It's actually created and hosted by a woman who is pro-choice, and she talks about all the medical information that is withheld from women regarding birth control, abortion. I really encourage people to do that. I want to also just kind of put into context contraception. From 1995 to 2011, the unintended pregnancy rate was 49%. Unintended pregnancy rate, national unintended pregnancy rate, was 49% in 1995. It only increased to 51% over the course of 20 years. And the nation has more access to contraception than ever before. It only increased. So there is this narrative out there that somehow contraception is reducing the national unintended pregnancy rate. So then why for 20 years, more than 20 years, did it not reduce the national unintended pregnancy rate? So the problem with contraception doesn't provide a moral framework in which to act. And when you have organizations like Planned Parenthood, in fact, just go to some of the fact sheets we have back the back table. But there's one in particular. If you go to radiance.life/protect our kids, there's one where Planned Parenthood on their Tumblr page says, in response to a teen who's asking, is it wrong to be promiscuous? And Planned Parenthood's response, verbatim, is, there's nothing bad or unhealthy about having a big number of sexual partners. So when you've got comprehensive sex education like that, you're going to continue to have nearly 1 million abortions a year.
So what does Radiant, just solely out of curiosity, the sex education look like from
Sexual risk avoidance programs, we support that. We support young teens, whether in middle school or high school, being fully educated as to all the forms of contraception out there, but all the ramifications, all the failure rates of those contraceptions, that abstinence is the only 100% effective method of not becoming pregnant. And that there is something wrong about having a big number of sexual partners. HPV would be one of those.
I would add only that according to Guttmacher.org, of those who have abortions, less than 10% complain about access to birth control. They just didn't want it or didn't use it at the heat of the moment or didn't use it correctly, but they have it, they just didn't use it properly or didn't use it because they didn't want to. It's not a lack of access, it's a lack of personal responsibility that we're dealing with.
All right, next question.
So for Dr. Wolstein and Reagan, my question is, when do you guys see the developmental point of a fetus or child to be the cutoff point for an abortion?
Yeah, that's more or less the same question. Do you want to say anything more specific about the developmental aspect of it, when you would see it as a cutoff for abortion?
I actually did not fully understand. And maybe you got
He's
more.
basically asking, if there is any point, 20 weeks, 24 weeks, 29 weeks, when we would say no abortions.
That is not up to me.
And I would agree. I would say there should always.
This is nothing that I should even try to form an opinion on.
Yeah, it should be up to, I think it should be allowed, and I think it should be up to the individual to decide based on their morality, based on their individual situation.
Thank you.
Can I just ask something just to clarify that?
Yes.
Because does that include partial birth abortion in your case? Do you support partial birth abortion? Partially birthing the child and severing the head and the spine and basically ripping it limb from it. Do you support partial birth abortion?
That's the way that you've been describing regular abortion. So.
No, not partially birthing the child.
But
It's
what I'm
significant.
saying is, by the definition you're using, there shouldn't be a distinction.
I'm
Reagan,
asking
have
I'm
you,
giving
do
you a
you
distinction.
know
Wait,
how
wait.
an abortion procedure is performed?
I do know how a modern abortion procedure.
Have you watched it?
I have. I went to Catholic school, like I said.
Can you explain it?
What?
Yeah.
Wait, hold on, everyone. Okay, let's get back to the questions. I want to actually give the audience a chance to ask the questions, so please let's allow for that. So go ahead with your question.
Sure. This is largely to Dr. Holshoe and Ms. Davis over here. My first issue was you said Planned Parenthood doesn't make money. The president of Planned Parenthood, Cecil Richards, makes $600K a year. Now, I don't know what your line of work is, but in my line of work, I'm not making $600K a year. So Planned Parenthood is something that is an organization that makes money largely off of murdering millions, mind you, of innocent people. Now, the actual question is, well, you said that the definition of personhood is different from person to person. It's rather based off of society. You're acting like it's law just because the justices said this is so, and it is law just because it said it is so. But one thing you really need to keep in mind is, for a long period of time in the United States, it used to be legal to sterilize the mentally ill. You know, but
What's your question?
I'm getting there. Hang on, please. All right, I listened to you speak for 2 hours. You can listen to me speak for 1 minute.
I apologize. I was just confused because the first question wasn't a question, and I thought maybe this one wouldn't be either.
Oh, no, it's going to get there, okay. So for a long period of time in the United States, it used to be legal to sterilize the mentally ill, okay, Buck versus Bell, 1927. And then later on it was repealed by Skinner versus Oklahoma in 1942. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes oversaw the decision. So I guess my question is, what's your thoughts on that? Because if we're applying what the justices said as absolute God-given law now, why wasn't it absolute God-given law back then? Just because something's biologically correct does not mean it should not mean that it is socially correct.
Do you want to talk about the Planned Parenthood part, and then I'll talk about the Constitution part?
I cannot understand in what way Planned Parenthood would be separate from the. Oh yes, you mean as to my point was that Planned Parenthood is not a money-making organization. There is no owner. If a CAO of any large organization makes that much money, it is because it is the best way to run that organization, and some of it has to be invested then in such a person. That is normal throughout the economy. It really does not mean that anybody is making money off abortions. Abortions are supported by the patients and by donors. Period. The money that the organization gets from the federal government goes solely for their other services.
Lie.
If you
Will
look at
not
the way
continue. I will not continue after this.
Thank you very much.
First of all, I just want to respond to the lie that happened back there. the way that Planned Parenthood gets its funding is it is reimbursed at the end of the month. So it's not like the funds are hedgeable. They say we spent this much money on this much money on that, they give the bill, and then they get money back for everything but the abortions. So that's how they're in conjunction with the Hyde Amendment. Don't worry, your dollars are not going to abortions. And in terms of the quote-unquote profit we've been hearing about, excess money that Planned Parenthood has does exist, but it isn't going to anyone. So it's not like there is someone out there profiting from Planned Parenthood. Any excess money from Planned Parenthood either goes to a charity or goes into a lockbox where it is used later if need be.
Or the
Now,
$600K a year.
Wait, okay.
that is a salary. People who work for things get salaries, and that is the salary of someone. But if it were a for-profit industry, then his salary wouldn't be the same every year. It would change based on how much money he made, and then he would get different sums each year because the profit was different each year. The fact that he has a solid set salary proves that it's still a nonprofit organization. You can look at their tax, like they file a 501c form, they're nonprofit, that's not a debate. So just briefly, to kind of, can you reiterate what your other question was? I'm sorry.
I'll ask, I think he was asking the moral weight of the law, in other words, to what extent is the law morally binding, is that correct?
No, I know the extent.
Okay.
I said,
morally binding in the
I said, how is it that we are deciding that this law is hardened law and that there's nothing wrong with it when throughout history we've shown time and time again that the law has done just complete moral and social atrocities?
Yeah, not every law is great. I think that civil forfeiture laws are completely incorrect. I think laws that are restricting abortions are completely incorrect. There are some laws that I disagree with, but that doesn't make them not the law.
I can also add to your historical point, grateful. I'm very grateful. Fortunately, society has progressed in this country to the extent that they now certainly would not support euthanasia. This is a historical development. We need more.
Are you saying we need more euthanasia?
What?
He's saying we need more social development.
He's saying if there was euthanasia in the past, why won't you get it now? This is pointless. From a time when there was euthanasia, this country and many others, obviously the one I came from, have progressed. This is no longer the law. Society changes, and I'm very happy about that.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi,
Are we
First who you're addressing, and then the question. Here, you can take this. Okay. Sorry about our technical difficulties here.
Can you hear me? Okay, awesome. Okay, so I guess my question is kind of mostly for Reagan, but all of you. My name is Shelby Trudeau, by the way. I used to be a college Republican, actually, 2 years ago, so we're on opposite sides. But my question is kind of, you guys, or Reagan specifically, had mentioned how making laws that restrict abortions lead to more abortions illegally. And I think that that's very similar to the debate that we should not have gun restrictions, because that will actually lead to just people doing it illegally and getting it, and then only the bad guys will have guns. My guess is, as a Democrat, you think we should have restrictions on guns. I believe that too, because I'm pro-life. I think that we should save everyone, and if one law saves someone's life, that's awesome. But kind of, I guess, to digress into my question is, 50% of Americans are pro-abortion, anti-abortion. It's pretty split. Is there ever going to be a law that we can just come to? Now I'm saying I would love for all abortion to be illegal, but for all of you, is there some sort of law that could be made where you're like, yeah, let's come together on this and make a moderate decision. Let's, at least in the form of progress, 50% of my fellow Americans think one way, 50% of my fellow Americans think this about gun restrictions. I should maybe change, do something about that because it's a democracy. Or is it just polarized and we're never going to get anywhere?
I don't think this is the panel to ask, if we're being completely honest. It doesn't seem like we have very many moderates on here, so if we were the legislature, we would just be deadlocked, or maybe the vote would go pro-life because they outnumber us here. But yeah, I think basically it would depend. If I were in Congress right now and someone tasked me with saying, make fewer abortions happen, I would not go towards restricting abortion. I would go towards working for paid maternity leave, poverty reduction programs, universal health care. Those are the strategies that I think of when I think about what's going to make sure we have fewer abortions, if that were the goal, because then we're getting the problem at the root. If I were to find someone...
Wilmington has been identified by the FBI as a hub for sex trafficking. That's why I go out there as much as I can. I can't do as much anymore. My question is this. The escorts show up, the women show up. The women go into the clinic. When the last of the women go into the clinic, the escorts leave. I will approach a woman because I care about her whether she has the abortion or not. If you care about women, why do you guys leave? Because when they come out of that clinic, they are in physical shock, trauma, pain. They're shaken. I'm not allowed to go on the property. Okay, I can't trespass. These women need somebody that cares about them. And I only ask you this. Stay there. Help them to their cars. Mm-hmm. I'm asking you why you don't do this. And then, yeah, I would love to be able to get a pamphlet into their hand and tell them that we have post-abortion counseling. Mm-hmm. Okay, I would like to do that. But sometimes you guys need to be there because you need to see what abortion does to these women. And you need to see how many men bring them there, and the men don't even pick them up.
Amen.
And some of these women drive from Kentucky, or they drive from Indianapolis, and they drive themselves home with no one else. And you guys need to see that. And maybe you would think differently about abortion. I'm going to let you answer that question because I respect you because you are very dedicated to helping Planned Parenthood and you believe that you're helping women. Can you tell me why you don't stay and escort them back after the abortion?
That's when they
First a little detail, the people coming from other states, because by now you have been successful in eliminating access to abortion in those, so that they have to travel this far. Just make it harder and harder and harder. That's not a good way to handle other people. But anyway, to your specific point, we are there to protect them as they go to their own destination, where they want to be, and then be treated. If I stand there until they come out several hours later, I could not do that. Who would have the time, and what could I do? Do I have to protect them against shouting before? Do you not have the compassion to shut up at that point? When it's over, you see? So if there is nobody accusing them doing anything, we can leave them in peace. That is really all. If there were nobody before, we would not be there. If there were anybody afterwards shouting again, we would also find students and others to protect them.
You're missing the point.
That is what we can do. The standing there, I have nothing to do with it. I'm helping them reach their goals. They are independent. I am not partisan to the extent that I go home with them. This is totally irrelevant to the task.
Not irrelevant at all.
May I
Oh,
respond very
we may
quickly?
respond quickly, and then we're
Yes.
going to actually shut it down. We're 15 minutes past the time we have this room, and we want to respect the time, the lateness of the hour. So I appreciate all
It's
that.
been made very clear to me, I go on the sidewalk at least once a week, every single week, consistently, to 2 clinics. And it's been, and I don't yell at people. I'm sorry that that women have endured that in front of your clinic. I don't yell at people, and I don't tell them, don't kill your baby. That is not something that I ever say. But the clinic escorts have made it very clear to us that they are only there because we are there. As soon as we leave, they leave. So we literally drive around the corner for about 20 minutes, and then we come back.
Yeah, they're there to protect the women from the protesters. That's their job.
They're not there to advocate for women in any way. They're only there because of us.
We don't leave. though.
Yeah,
We
they're
don't leave,
advocating
they leave.
for women
They leave.
because there's someone standing at the door trying to get to these women, trying to speak to these women. That's if someone's trying to talk to you and in your face, that's harassment. His
We're not
job
allowed-
is he's there while you guys are there. That his job is to do that because he's protecting the women from you. And
We
so
don't leave. We don't leave. We stay. They leave in front of us. The escorts leave before we leave. And we are not allowed on the property. So we're not in the people's space. They have to come to us.
on their way there. But anyway, I'm not a clinic escort, but that's the way.
All right, we're going to end the discussion here. I think this has been hopefully helpful and to everyone. And let's thank the speakers for those of you who are able to stay for more time. And thanks again for the organizers, especially Jenna.